The plane dropped like a stone through black sky, and Evelyn Hart's world tilted sideways. Her eyes snapped open to find her head resting on the shoulder of the man she'd dismissed as nobody. The worn jacket, the tired eyes, the single father who didn't belong in first class. Around them, passengers screamed. Overhead bins burst open. The captain's voice cut out mid-sentence, replaced by a sickening silence that made her stomach drop harder than the aircraft itself. Then the intercom crackled with words that stopped her heart. "The captain is unconscious. Is there anyone who can fly this plane? Before we dive into this incredible story, I need your help. If you enjoy what you're about to hear, please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel." Now, let's begin. Evelyn Hart didn't believe in wasted time. Every minute had a price, every interaction a purpose, every flight a deadline. At 38, she'd built herself into exactly what she'd always wanted to be: untouchable. CEO of Skybridge Aviation Technologies, the company revolutionizing aircraft safety systems. Her face had graced magazine covers. Her quarterly reports moved markets. Her voice silenced boardrooms full of men who'd underestimated her exactly once. So when she settled into seat 2A of Flight 847 from Seattle to New York, adjusting her Armani blazer and opening her laptop before the cabin door even closed, she had zero interest in the man shuffling into 2B beside her. He looked tired. That was her first thought. Not just end of a long day tired, but bone-deep exhaustion that lived in the shoulders and settled into the lines around the eyes. Mid-40s, maybe. Brown hair starting to gray at the temples. A navy jacket that had seen better years, though it was clean and carefully maintained. He carried a worn leather messenger bag and a children's book, something about butterflies, which he tucked into the seat pocket with the kind of careful attention that suggested it mattered. Evelyn's second thought was simpler. Not my problem. She had a presentation to finalize. The board meeting on Monday would determine whether Skybridge went forward with the automated emergency response system she'd been developing for 3 years. Billions in contracts hung in the balance. Airlines across the globe were watching. She had exactly 5 hours to perfect every slide, every projection, every answer to every question they might ask. The man beside her clicked his seatbelt and pulled out a paperback. Some self-help title about helping children through grief. He opened it to a dog-eared page and began reading with the kind of focus that suggested he'd been stuck on that particular chapter for a while. Evelyn glanced at him once more, cataloged him in the part of her brain reserved for forgettable details, and returned to her screen. The flight attendant's voice floated through the cabin with the usual pre-flight announcements. Safety demonstrations, exit rows, electronic devices. Evelyn had heard it 10,000 times. She kept typing. "Excuse me." The voice beside her was quiet, almost apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt, but you're going to need to put that away for takeoff." Evelyn looked up. The man, her seatmate, wasn't looking at her. He was still reading his book, but his tone had carried something she couldn't quite place. Not judgment, not superiority, just fact. "I know the rules," she said, sharper than necessary. "I'm finishing a thought." "I'm sure you are." He turned a page. "Still going to need to close it." The flight attendant appeared before Evelyn could respond, smiling that professional smile that meant business. "Ma'am, we're preparing for departure. I'll need you to stow your laptop, please." Evelyn saved her work with more force than required and snapped the computer shut. She slid it into her bag, her jaw tight. Beside her, the man said nothing. He just kept reading about helping children process loss, his finger following the lines with careful attention. The plane pushed back from the gate, taxied toward the runway. The engines built to that familiar whine that usually lulled Evelyn into productive focus. Tonight, though, something felt different. Maybe it was the weather. The forecast had mentioned storms over the Midwest. Maybe it was the presentation weighing on her mind. Maybe it was the fact that her assistant had quit yesterday, the third one this year, with some tearful speech about work-life balance that Evelyn had barely listened to. Or maybe it was the man beside her, reading about grief with the kind of attention that suggested he knew it personally. The plane lifted into darkness. Seattle's lights fell away below them, replaced by the vast emptiness of night sky. Evelyn pulled out her tablet the moment the seatbelt sign dinged off. She had backup slides to review, market projections to memorize, competitor analyses to study. An hour passed, then another. The cabin lights dimmed. Around them, passengers settled into sleep or movies or quiet conversation. The man beside her finished his chapter, closed the book, and stared out the window at nothing. Just darkness and the blinking wing light cutting through it. Long day? The question came from Evelyn's mouth before she realized she was asking. She didn't know why. She didn't usually do small talk, especially not at 30,000 feet with strangers who clearly couldn't help her career. He turned from the window. In the dim light, his eyes were darker than she'd first thought. Thoughtful. Careful. You could say that. Business or pleasure? She didn't know why she was continuing this. Maybe exhaustion was making her social. Maybe she was procrastinating on the presentation she'd already reviewed 40 times. Neither, really. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Family obligation. My daughter had a school event I couldn't miss. Flew out this morning, flying back tonight. Back to work tomorrow. Dedication, Evelyn said. It came out flatter than she'd intended. Parenthood, he corrected gently. Different thing. Something in his tone made her pause. Not defensive, not proud, just stating a fact about his life with the same certainty he'd used about the laptop rule. She waited for him to elaborate, to do what people usually did, fill silence with unnecessary details about their children's accomplishments or their own sacrifices. But he just returned his gaze to the window. Evelyn went back to her tablet, read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing it. Her eyes felt heavy. The cabin temperature had that particular warmth that made consciousness feel optional. She blinked hard, trying to focus. The presentation blurred. She'd been awake since 4 that morning, working through emails before her 6 a.m. strategy session. Then meetings until noon. A working lunch, 2 conference calls, the car to the airport. No dinner, just coffee and determination. Her body was sending signals she'd learned to ignore. The heaviness in her limbs, the way her thoughts kept sliding sideways, the slow blinks that lasted longer each time. Just need to review section 4, she thought. Then the appendix. Then the tablet slipped slightly in her hands. She caught it, jerked herself upright. Beside her, the man had pulled out a small notebook and was writing something with careful, precise handwriting. Not frantic like her scrawls during board meetings. Deliberate, like he was trying to get something exactly right. Evelyn's eyes closed, just for a second, just to rest them. When she opened them again, or thought she did, the cabin had changed. Darker, somehow. Quieter. Her tablet was gone, and her head was resting on something that definitely wasn't her window. She jerked upright, disoriented. Her neck protested the sudden movement. The man beside her, Michael, she somehow knew now, though she didn't remember learning his name, was carefully adjusting his jacket, which had apparently been serving as a buffer between her head and his shoulder. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said immediately, heat flooding her face. "I didn't mean to." "You needed sleep," he said simply. "No harm done." She looked around the cabin, trying to orient herself. Most passengers were asleep. The flight attendants were nowhere visible. The cabin lights were at their lowest setting, just enough to navigate the aisles. Outside the window, still nothing but darkness. "How long was I?" "About 45 minutes. He said it without judgment, without the knowing smile people usually gave when catching someone in a moment of weakness. "You were working pretty hard before. Figured you needed it." Evelyn's professional instincts kicked in, apologize, dismiss, re-establish boundaries. But the words stuck in her throat. She had needed it. She still felt exhausted, but that desperate edge had dulled slightly, and he'd just let her sleep. Hadn't woken her, hadn't made it awkward, just stayed still and let a stranger rest. "Thank you," she managed. He nodded and returned to his notebook. Evelyn caught a glimpse of the page, neat columns of numbers, what looked like a budget. Careful notations in the margins. The handwriting of someone who'd learned precision mattered. She should go back to her presentation. Should use this burst of semi-consciousness to finalize her talking points. But her tablet felt impossibly far away in her bag, and the warmth of the cabin was wrapping around her again, and her eyes were already closing despite her best efforts. "Go ahead," Michael said quietly, not looking up from his notebook. "I don't mind." Evelyn wanted to protest, wanted to maintain the professional distance she'd built her entire career on. But her body had other priorities. Her head listed toward his shoulder again, and this time she didn't fight it. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was the scratch of his pen on paper, steady and certain. She woke to chaos. The plane lurched violently to the left, throwing her against her seatbelt hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Overhead bins rattled. The carry-on bag tumbled into the aisle with a crash that made someone scream. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then blazed to full brightness. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. Beside her, Michael was already upright, his hand braced against the seat in front of him. His face had changed, the tiredness burned away by something sharper. Alert, focused, another jolt. This one felt wrong, like the plane had dropped and then caught itself at the last second. Evelyn's stomach flipped. Around them, passengers were gripping armrests, looking around wildly. A baby started crying. Then another. The intercom crackled to life. The senior flight attendant's voice came through, professional but strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We're experiencing some turbulence. Everything is under control." But Evelyn had flown enough to know the difference between routine turbulence and whatever this was. The plane was moving wrong, banking too hard. The engines sounded off, higher pitched than normal, like they were straining. Michael was already leaning forward, looking toward the cockpit. His hand had moved to his seatbelt, fingers resting on the buckle but not releasing it yet. "This isn't normal turbulence," Evelyn said. She meant it as a question, but it came out as a statement. "No," he agreed. "It's not." The plane dropped again. This time it felt like an elevator with cut cables, stomach and throat, weightless terror. Screams erupted throughout the cabin. Oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments with a collective whoosh that sounded like the plane itself was gasping. "Oh my God!" someone shouted. "What's happening?" Evelyn grabbed her mask with shaking hands. Beside her, Michael did the same, but his movements were automatic, efficient. He pulled it over his face, secured it, then immediately looked around at nearby passengers to make sure they were doing the same. An elderly woman across the aisle was fumbling with hers, her hand shaking too badly to get the strap over her head. Without hesitation, Michael unbuckled, leaned across the aisle, and gently took the mask from her hands. "It's okay," he said, his voice calm despite the mask muffling it. "Let me help. You're doing fine." He secured it over her face, adjusted the straps, made sure she was breathing properly. Then he returned to his seat and rebuckled just as another jolt hit. The flight attendant's voice came through again, higher now. "Please remain seated. Please remain calm." Then the cockpit door burst open. The co-pilot stumbled into the cabin, his face sheet white. Behind him, Evelyn caught a glimpse of the captain slumped forward in his seat, not moving. The co-pilot grabbed the senior flight attendant by her shoulders, spoke rapidly in her ear. Evelyn couldn't hear the words over the roar of wind and engines and passenger panic, but she could see the flight attendant's face drain of color. The co-pilot disappeared back into the cockpit. The door closed. The senior flight attendant stood there for 3 seconds that felt like hours. Then she picked up the intercom handset. Her hand was visibly shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice cracked. She tried again. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need your attention. The captain has suffered a medical emergency. The first officer is handling the aircraft, but we need to know if there is anyone on board with significant flight experience. If you have extensive flying experience, please make yourself known to the flight crew immediately." The cabin erupted, passengers shouting questions, a man near the back yelling about his wife's heart condition, a teenager crying for his parents 3 rows away. The plane bucked again, harder, and the flight attendant grabbed the nearest seat to keep from falling. Beside Evelyn, Michael was perfectly still. She turned to look at him. His eyes were fixed on the cockpit door. His jaw was tight. His hands were gripping the armrests, but not in fear, in restraint, like he was physically holding himself in place. "We're going to die," someone sobbed behind them. "Oh God, we're going to die." The intercom crackled again. This time it was a man's voice, the co-pilot, Evelyn realized. Younger than she'd expected, barely controlled panic bleeding through his professional training. "I need help up here, now. If anyone has any experience flying aircraft, any experience at all, I need you in this cockpit immediately." Another drop, longer this time. 5 seconds of free fall that felt like minutes. Evelyn's vision grayed at the edges. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The mask was on her face, but no air seemed to be reaching her lungs. Then Michael unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. The movement was so sudden, so deliberate, that it cut through Evelyn's panic. He was standing in the aisle, one hand on the overhead compartment for balance, facing the cockpit. His expression had changed completely. The tired, careful single father was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone harder, more certain. The senior flight attendant was struggling toward him against the turbulence. "Sir, I need you to sit down." "I can fly this plane," Michael said. His voice carried through the chaos, steady and absolute. "I can help." The flight attendant's eyes went wide. "You're a pilot?" "Yes." He was already moving toward the cockpit, his steps sure despite the bucking aircraft. 11 years commercial, 7 years military before that. Search and rescue mostly. If he needs help up there, I can provide it. Evelyn watched him go, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. The man in the worn jacket. The one reading about helping grieving children. The single father who'd let her sleep on his shoulder because she looked tired. A pilot. Not just a pilot. Military search and rescue. He disappeared into the cockpit. The door closed behind him. The plane lurched again, and Evelyn grabbed her armrests hard enough to hurt. Around her, passengers were praying, crying, calling loved ones. The woman Michael had helped with her mask was whispering something over and over, her eyes squeezed shut. Minutes crawled by. The turbulence didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. The plane was banking at angles that felt impossible, tilting so far to the left that Evelyn could see nothing but dark sky through her window. Then it would level out for 30 seconds before dropping again. That horrible weightless sensation that made her certain they were falling toward whatever was below them in the darkness. A flight attendant was making her way through the cabin, checking passengers, speaking in low, urgent tones. When she reached Evelyn's row, she leaned in close. "I need you to assume the brace position when I give the signal. Do you understand?" "What signal?" Evelyn's voice didn't sound like her own. "What's happening?" "Just be ready." The flight attendant moved on before Evelyn could ask anything else. The intercom crackled. Michael's voice came through, and somehow, impossibly, it was calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Michael Cross. I'm a certified commercial pilot, and I'm now assisting the first officer in the cockpit. We've experienced multiple system failures, including loss of primary navigation and hydraulic pressure. We're currently working to stabilize the aircraft and prepare for an emergency landing." A fresh wave of panic swept through the cabin. Emergency landing, system failures, the words everyone feared. But Michael wasn't done. "I know you're scared. I understand that. But I need you to listen to me carefully. I've flown through worse than this, much worse. We have partial control of the aircraft, and we're working to get full control back. What I need from you is to stay calm, stay seated, and follow every instruction the flight crew gives you. Can you do that for me?" Something in his voice, that steady, unshakable certainty, cut through the terror. Evelyn found herself nodding even though he couldn't see her. Around the cabin, passengers were quieting, straining to hear. "The first officer and I are going to get you on the ground safely. That's my only job right now. Your job is to trust us and stay strong for each other. We're in this together, and we're going to get through it together." The intercom clicked off. Evelyn stared at the empty seat beside her. She'd dismissed him, categorized him as nobody, not worth her time or attention, a tired single father in a cheap jacket with nothing to offer someone like her. And now he was the only thing standing between 300 people and death. The plane shuddered again, a long, grinding vibration that felt like metal tearing. Somewhere behind Evelyn, a man was vomiting. A child was screaming for her mother. The flight attendants were strapping themselves into jump seats, their faces pale and set. Evelyn pulled out her phone. No signal this high up, but she opened her messages anyway and typed to her brother in Boston. "I love you. Tell Mom I love her. Take care of the company if something happens." She didn't send it, couldn't send it, but seeing the words on the screen made them real, made this moment real. She was going to die. They were all going to die. In this metal tube hurtling through darkness, completely at the mercy of two men in a cockpit trying to fix systems that had already failed. The intercom crackled again. The co-pilot this time. his voice tight. Flight crew, prepare for emergency landing procedures. Passengers, when you hear the command, immediately assume the brace position. Head down, hands on your ankles or behind your head. Stay in that position until the aircraft comes to a complete stop. Evelyn's whole body was shaking now. She couldn't control it. Her hands, her legs, even her jaw. Terror had taken over every cell, every nerve. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in a boardroom or a hospital bed or anywhere dignified. In a falling plane with strangers, her last moments spent in animal fear. Through the darkness outside her window, she caught a glimpse of lights far below. A town, maybe. Or a city. People down there going about their normal Saturday night, completely unaware that Flight 847 was dying above them. Then Michael's voice came through one more time. Quieter now, personal, like he was talking to each of them individually. Listen to me. I've been exactly where you are right now, scared, certain it was over. I've been in aircraft that were hit, that were failing, that everyone said couldn't be saved, and I'm still here. You know why? Because fear doesn't decide how this ends. Skill does. Determination does. And I am very skilled, and I am very determined, and I am not letting this plane hit the ground wrong. His voice hardened, took on an edge of command that must have been forged in military cockpits. So when I tell you to brace, you brace. When I tell you to stay down, you stay down. When we hit the ground, and we will hit it hard, you protect your head, you stay conscious, and the second we stop moving, you evacuate this aircraft in an orderly fashion. No panic. No pushing. We're all walking away from this, every single one of us. Do you understand? Evelyn realized she was crying. Tears streaming down her face, her whole body racked with sobs she couldn't control. But somewhere under the terror, something else was growing. Not hope, exactly, but something like it. Belief. She believed him. This man she'd dismissed, this stranger she'd judged, this single father whose name she'd barely bothered to learn, she believed he could save them. The plane dropped again, and this time it didn't level out. They were descending, fast, too fast. Brace, brace, brace! The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin. Heads down, now! Evelyn bent forward, grabbed her ankles, pressed her head down as far as it would go. Around her, passengers did the same. The woman across the aisle was praying in Spanish. The baby was still crying, a high, thin wail that somehow cut through everything else. Down, down, down. The engine screaming. The plane shaking so hard Evelyn's teeth rattled. The oxygen mask hanging useless now as she fought to breathe against the angle and the terror and the absolute certainty of impact. Through the roar she heard Michael's voice one last time, not on the intercom but shouting from the cockpit. Words she couldn't make out but the tone unmistakable. Total focus, absolute command, a man doing battle with a dying machine and refusing to lose. The lights flickered, went out, came back. Someone was screaming. Maybe it was Evelyn. She couldn't tell anymore. Then the world exploded. The impact hit like a bomb. Metal shrieking, the sensation of sliding, spinning, tilting at impossible angles. Evelyn's head snapped forward despite the brace position, stars exploding across her vision. The plane was tearing itself apart around them. She was sure of it. This was death. This was the end. But they were still moving, still sliding. Not tumbling, not flipping, just that horrible grinding slide that seemed to go on forever. Then nothing. Absolute stillness. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The silence was so complete, so sudden after the chaos, that it felt wrong, like the world had ended and they just hadn't realized it yet. Then someone coughed. A baby's cry cut through the darkness. An emergency light flickered to life, then another. Evacuate! A flight attendant's voice, hoarse but functioning. Everybody up! Move to the exits, now! The cabin erupted into controlled chaos. Passengers unbuckling, stumbling into aisles, helping each other move toward the emergency exits that were already being thrown open. Cold air rushed in, shocking and wonderful and real. Evelyn unbuckled with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She tried to stand and her legs almost gave out. The floor was tilted at an angle. They'd come to rest nose down, she realized. But they'd stopped. They were on the ground. They were alive. She stumbled toward the exit, part of the stream of passengers all moving together. Down the emergency slide, hitting grass that was wet with rain she hadn't known was falling. Rolling away from the plane, getting distance, turning back to look. Flight 847 sat crumpled in the middle of what looked like a farm field. The nose was crumpled. One wing was bent at an angle that should have been impossible, but it was intact. Mostly intact. And 300 people were pouring out of it into the rain, into the darkness, into life. Emergency vehicles were already approaching, their lights cutting through the night, sirens wailing. How long had they been falling? How had anyone known where to find them? Evelyn stood in the mud and rain, her entire body shaking, and watched the cockpit door, watched passengers evacuate, watched flight attendants helping the injured, the elderly, the children. Then two figures emerged from the cockpit. The co-pilot, young and shell-shocked but walking, and behind him, supporting him, Michael. His shirt was torn. There was blood on his temple. He moved like everything hurt, but he was alive, walking, already scanning the crowd, counting heads with the practiced eye of someone who'd done this before. Their eyes met across the chaos. Evelyn didn't have words, didn't have anything except the truth of what had just happened. He'd saved them. All of them. This man she'd dismissed, this stranger she'd judged, this tired single father whose name she'd barely bothered to learn. He'd looked death in the face and refused it 300 times over. Michael nodded once, just a small acknowledgement that she was alive, that they were all alive, then turned his attention to a family struggling away from the wreckage, moving to help before anyone even asked. Evelyn sank to her knees in the mud, her legs finally giving out completely. Around her, passengers were crying, embracing, calling loved ones. Emergency crews were establishing triage. The rain kept falling, cold and clean and impossible. They were alive. And everything she'd thought she knew about herself, about value, about what mattered, all of it had shattered the moment that plane started falling. The CEO who'd built an empire on being right, on being untouchable, on never wasting a moment, she knelt in the mud and realized she didn't know anything at all. The emergency lights painted everything in harsh red and white as paramedics moved through the crowd of survivors. Evelyn stayed on her knees in the mud longer than she meant to, watching the organized chaos unfold around her. Someone wrapped a silver emergency blanket around her shoulders. A paramedic crouched beside her, shining a light in her eyes. Asking questions she answered automatically. Name, age, any pain, any injuries, she had none. Not physically, but something inside her felt cracked open, exposed to air it had never touched before. Ma'am, can you stand? The paramedic's voice was gentle but insistent. We need to get you checked out properly. Evelyn let him help her up. Her legs held this time, though everything felt distant and strange, like she was watching herself from somewhere outside her body. He guided her toward the triage area they'd established, a section of field lit by portable lights where medical personnel were assessing everyone who'd walked away from the wreckage. As they moved through the crowd, Evelyn saw Michael. He was sitting on the bumper of an ambulance while a paramedic cleaned the cut on his temple. Another paramedic was trying to get him to lie down on a stretcher, and he was refusing with quiet but absolute firmness. I'm fine, he was saying. Check the passengers first. There were elderly people on board, children. I'm not your priority. Sir, you just crash-landed a commercial aircraft. You need to be examined for... I said check the passengers first. Michael's voice remained calm, but something in his tone made the paramedic step back. Not fear. Respect. The recognition of someone who would not be moved on this particular point. The paramedic sighed and moved on to the next patient. Michael pressed a gauze pad to his temple and stood up, scanning the crowd with that same counting expression Evelyn had seen right after the crash, making sure everyone was accounted for. Their eyes met again. This time Evelyn walked toward him, the emergency blanket trailing behind her like a cape. You're hurt, she said when she reached him. It sounded stupid the moment the words left her mouth. Of course he was hurt. He'd just saved 300 lives while wrestling a dying plane to the ground. It's nothing, he said, and she believed he genuinely thought that was true. Are you okay? You hit your head pretty hard during landing. I don't remember hitting it. Evelyn touched her forehead, and her fingers came away with blood she hadn't realized was there. I don't remember much after we touched down, just sliding and the noise. That's normal. Adrenaline does that. He pressed the gauze more firmly to his own wound. You should let them check you out. Head injuries are tricky. So should you. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Probably. But there are people here who need help more than I do. A woman approached them then, holding a small boy's hand. The child couldn't have been more than 5, his eyes wide and red from crying. The woman's face was tear-streaked but determined. "Are you the pilot?" she asked Michael. "The one who landed the plane?" "I helped, yes." "You saved my son's life." Her voice broke. "You saved all of us. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know what to say except thank you. Thank you." The boy was staring at Michael with the kind of awe children reserve for superheroes. Michael crouched down to the child's level, wincing slightly at the movement. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Tommy," the boy whispered. "Well, Tommy, you were very brave up there. Your mom tells me you stayed calm and did exactly what the flight attendants told you to do. That's what helped keep everyone safe. You should be proud." "Were you scared?" Tommy asked. Michael considered the question seriously. "Yes, I was scared. But being scared is okay. It's what you do when you're scared that matters. And you did great." More people were approaching now. Passengers who'd realized who Michael was, what he'd done. They formed a loose crowd around him, some crying, some trying to shake his hand, all of them needing to express something that words couldn't quite capture. Evelyn stepped back, giving them space. She watched Michael handle each person with the same quiet attention, listening to their thanks, deflecting their praise, redirecting focus to the flight crew who'd evacuated everyone safely. He looked exhausted. The cut on his temple was still bleeding, but he gave each person his full attention, like their gratitude mattered more than his own pain. A news van pulled up at the edge of the field, then another. Reporters were already setting up cameras, trying to get shots of the wreckage and the survivors. One of them spotted Michael and started moving toward him with purpose, microphone in hand. Michael saw the reporter coming, and something changed in his expression. Not fear, but something close to it. He looked around quickly, spotted Evelyn, and moved toward her with surprising speed for someone who'd just crash-landed a plane. "I need to go," he said quietly when he reached her. "The press, I can't talk to them. Not about this." "Why not?" Evelyn asked, genuinely confused. "You're a hero. They'll want your story." "That's exactly why." He was already backing away toward the darker part of the field, away from the lights and cameras. "I can't explain right now, but please, if they ask, you don't know where I went." Before Evelyn could respond, he'd disappeared into the crowd of survivors and emergency personnel. The reporter reached Evelyn moments later, breathless and eager. "Excuse me, ma'am. Sarah Chen, News 7. Can you tell me what happened up there?" Evelyn looked at where Michael had vanished, then back at the reporter. "The captain had a medical emergency. A passenger with flight experience helped land the plane. That's all I know." "Do you know the passenger's name? Where is he now?" "No," Evelyn lied smoothly. "I don't know his name. Everything happened so fast." The reporter moved on, hunting for someone more cooperative. Evelyn pulled the emergency blanket tighter and tried to understand what had just happened. Why would someone run from recognition after doing something so extraordinary? Most people would embrace that kind of attention, would ride the wave of heroism into every talk show and interview they could find. But Michael had fled it like it was dangerous. A hand touched Evelyn's elbow. She turned to find a middle-aged woman in a paramedic's uniform, her expression kind but firm. "I'm Amy Chen. I need you to come with me for a full examination. That head wound needs proper attention, and we need to make sure you don't have a concussion." Evelyn wanted to refuse, to go find Michael and get answers to the questions piling up in her mind. But her head was starting to pound, and the adrenaline was wearing off, leaving exhaustion so profound she could barely stand. She let Amy guide her to an ambulance. The next hours blurred together. Examination, questions from aviation authorities, more questions from police, a representative from the airline who looked pale and kept apologizing in a shaking voice. Evelyn answered everything on autopilot while her mind stayed stuck on one image. Michael's face when he saw those reporters coming. The way he'd run. By the time they let her go, dawn was breaking over the field. The wreckage of Flight 847 looked even worse in daylight. The crumpled nose, the torn wing, the long scar it had carved through the grass. Investigators swarmed over it like ants, documenting everything. Evelyn's phone had survived the crash. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages. Her assistant, former assistant, had somehow heard about the crash and left a voicemail telling her to call immediately. Her brother had left 6 increasingly panicked messages. Her mother had texted simply, "Please be alive." She called her brother first. "Evelyn! Oh my God, Evelyn!" His voice cracked. "I saw the news. They said Flight 847 went down. I've been calling for hours." "I'm okay," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Flat, distant. "I'm alive. Everyone's alive." "How?" "The news is saying it was a miracle. Multiple system failures, the captain incapacitated. How did anyone survive that?" "There was a passenger, a pilot. He landed it. They're saying he's refusing to talk to the press. Nobody knows who he is. The airline won't release passenger information." "Evelyn, what happened up there?" She closed her eyes, saw the plane falling, felt her head on Michael's shoulder, watched him stand up and walk toward certain death with absolute calm. "I don't know," she said. "I need to go. I'll call you later." She hung up before he could protest. A shuttle bus was loading survivors to take them to a hotel where the airline had arranged rooms. Evelyn climbed aboard, found a seat, and stared out the window at the crash site shrinking behind them. The hotel was chaos. Survivors reuniting with families who'd driven through the night to get there, reporters crowding the lobby, airline representatives trying to coordinate everything while looking like they hadn't slept in days. Evelyn checked in, got her room key, and escaped to the elevator before anyone could recognize her. The room was generic, beige walls, mass-produced art, industrial carpet. She stood in the middle of it for a long moment, then walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back was someone she barely recognized, hair matted with mud and dried blood, makeup smeared beyond repair, a bandage on her temple where they'd cleaned and treated the cut. The Armani blazer was ruined, torn at the shoulder and stained with things she didn't want to identify. She looked like someone who'd survived a plane crash, which, she supposed, was accurate. Evelyn stripped off her clothes and stood in the shower until the water ran cold, watching mud and blood swirl down the drain. When she finally emerged, she felt marginally more human. Still exhausted, still shaken, but functional. Her laptop had survived the crash, protected in her bag. She opened it and stared at her presentation, the one she'd been so desperate to perfect. The board meeting was Monday. Tomorrow, technically, though it felt like years had passed since she'd cared about quarterly projections and market share. She should review it, should finalize her talking points, should prepare for the questions about how the crash might affect the company's reputation, given that Skybridge made aviation safety systems. Instead, she opened her browser and typed, "Michael Cross pilot." The search returned thousands of results. Too many, too generic. She added Seattle and tried again. Still nothing useful. Just articles about various pilots named Michael Cross, none of them matching the man from the plane. She tried Michael Cross search and rescue and got closer. A few mentions in old military publications, commendations for service, but nothing recent. Nothing that explained who he was or why he'd been sitting in coach on a commercial flight wearing a worn jacket and reading a book about helping children through grief. A knock on her door interrupted her searching. Evelyn considered ignoring it, but the knock came again, insistent. "Ms. Hart? It's Richard Preston from Skybridge Aviation. I need to speak with you urgently." Evelyn sighed and opened the door. Richard was her VP of Communications, a rail-thin man in his 50s who looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "Richard, what are you doing here? What do you think I'm doing here?" The CEO of an aviation safety company just survived a crash caused by multiple system failures. The press is going insane. The board is freaking out. I drove through the night because we need to get ahead of this before it destroys everything you've built. He pushed past her into the room, already pulling out his tablet. "I've drafted 3 statements, one for the press, one for the board, one for our clients. I need you to review them immediately, and we need to discuss your interview strategy. Every major network wants you. This could be terrible for the company, or it could be the best PR we've ever had, depending on how we handle it." Evelyn stared at him. People almost died last night. I almost died. I know. And I'm grateful you're alive. But right now, we need to think about the company. Our stock is going to take a hit when the market opens. Our competitors are going to use this. We need to control the narrative. Something cold settled in Evelyn's chest. This was what she'd built. This was the world she'd chosen. Where a plane crash wasn't a tragedy, it was a PR problem. Where 300 lives saved meant nothing compared to quarterly earnings. Get out, she said quietly. Richard looked up from his tablet. Excuse me? Get out. I'll deal with the company tomorrow. Right now I need to be alone. Evelyn, we don't have time for... I said get out. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, cutting through his protests. I almost died last night. I am taking 1 day to process that. The company can survive 24 hours without me. Now leave. Richard opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold. I'm sorry. You're right. I'm scared, Evelyn. If this goes wrong, everything we've built could collapse. Then maybe we built it on the wrong foundation, she said. He left looking confused. Evelyn locked the door behind him and returned to her laptop. She tried different search combinations, different databases, anything that might tell her more about Michael Cross. Then she remembered something. The notebook he'd been writing in, the careful budget calculations, the worn messenger bag that had survived the crash along with him. She'd seen him leave it in the overhead compartment, seen him forget about it in the chaos of evacuation. It would still be there, in the wreckage. Evidence of who he was, what his life looked like outside of those terrible hours when he'd held death at bay. Evelyn stood up, grabbed her jacket, and headed for the door. She needed answers, needed to understand why a man who'd saved 300 lives was hiding from recognition, needed to know why someone with his skills and courage had been sitting in coach reading about grief. The crash site was still restricted, but Evelyn had spent years learning how to get into places she wasn't supposed to be. She talked her way past the first security checkpoint by showing her CEO credentials and mentioning Skybridge's safety systems. Got through the second by implying she was conducting company business for the investigation. The field was quieter now. Most survivors had been evacuated. The investigation team was smaller, more focused. They'd erected a tent over part of the wreckage, protecting it from the elements while they documented everything. Evelyn approached a woman in an NTSB jacket who looked less busy than the others. Excuse me, I was on the flight. I left something in my overhead compartment, my medication. Is there any way I could retrieve it? The woman shook her head. I'm sorry, ma'am. The wreckage is an active investigation site. Nothing can be removed until we've completed our documentation. But it's just personal belongings. Surely, I understand, but protocol is protocol. We'll release personal items as soon as we're able, probably within a week. Evelyn thanked her and walked away, frustrated. She stood at the edge of the restricted zone, staring at the crumpled fuselage of Flight 847. Somewhere in there was Michael's bag, his notebook, the answers she needed. You're looking for something. The voice made her jump. She turned to find an older man in investigator's gear, his hair steel gray, his eyes sharp and assessing. I left something on the plane, Evelyn said, but they won't let me get it. Smart woman like you knows that's not how crash investigations work. He smiled slightly. I'm Thomas Reed, lead investigator. You're Evelyn Hart, Skybridge CEO. I recognized you from the coverage. Then you know I understand the importance of proper procedure. I do, which makes me wonder why you're really here. Thomas studied her face. You're looking for information about the passenger pilot, Michael Cross. Evelyn's heart kicked up. You know him? I know of him, enough to know he doesn't want to be found. Thomas glanced back at the wreckage. And enough to know that what he did last night was extraordinary. 11 years since he flew commercially, and he puts that plane down with only 6 serious injuries and 0 fatalities. That's not luck. That's skill most pilots will never have. Why hasn't he flown in 11 years? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. That's his story to tell, not mine. He saved my life. I think I deserve to know who he is. Maybe. But wanting to know and deserving to know aren't always the same thing. Thomas turned to leave, then paused. He's not hiding because he's ashamed. He's hiding because he has things in his life that matter more than being called a hero. If you're smart, and I think you are, you'll respect that. He walked away before Evelyn could respond. She stood there as the morning sun climbed higher, warming the field where she'd nearly died. Emergency workers were packing up their equipment. News vans were pulling away, moving on to other stories. Life was returning to normal for everyone who hadn't been on that plane. But nothing felt normal to Evelyn. The world had tilted sideways, and she couldn't figure out how to straighten it. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother. "Mom's freaking out. Please call her." Another from Richard. "Board wants emergency meeting Monday morning before your presentation. Need to brief you ASAP." A third from an unknown number. "Ms. Hart, this is David Chen from the Washington Post. I'd like to interview you about the crash and the anonymous hero who saved everyone. Please call me." Evelyn silenced her phone and walked back to her rental car. She drove without destination, just moving because staying still felt impossible. The roads were empty this early on a Sunday morning. She passed farms and small towns and churches with parking lots starting to fill for morning service. She ended up at a diner 30 miles from the crash site. The kind of place with red vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since yesterday. A waitress who looked barely awake took her order without recognition or interest. Evelyn sat in a corner booth and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Less than 24 hours ago, she'd been the CEO who had it all figured out. The woman who'd built an empire on certainty and control, who knew the value of every minute, every interaction, every relationship. That woman had dismissed Michael Cross as nobody, had judged him by his jacket and his book, and decided he had nothing to offer her. That woman had been so completely, devastatingly wrong. The coffee arrived, terrible and perfect at the same time. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the mug and stared out the window at the parking lot. A family was loading into a minivan. Parents, 3 kids, a grandmother. The kids were arguing about something. The parents looked exhausted. The grandmother was laughing. Normal, ordinary. The kind of life Evelyn had left behind years ago in her climb to the top. Her phone buzzed again. Another number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Ms. Hart, this is Jennifer Walters. I'm a caseworker with Family Services in Seattle. I'm trying to locate Michael Cross. His daughter is asking for him, and we can't reach him. The airline gave me your number as someone who might know how to contact him." Evelyn sat up straighter. "His daughter?" "Yes, Emma. She's 8. She's staying with her regular caregiver while Michael was traveling, but she's seen the news about the crash. She knows her father was on that flight, and she's very upset. If you know how to reach him, please. It's important." "I don't have his number," Evelyn said, "but I can try to find him. What's your number?" Jennifer rattled it off. "Please hurry. Emma is very frightened, and Michael needs to know she's asking for him." The call ended. Evelyn stared at her phone, pieces clicking together. The book about helping children through grief, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he'd talked about parenthood as something different from dedication. Michael wasn't just a single father. He was a widower raising a daughter alone, working some job that let him fly to Seattle for a school event and back the same day, living a life that clearly didn't include enough money for first-class tickets or new jackets. And now that daughter was scared and asking for him, while he was somewhere hiding from reporters who wanted to turn him into a story. Evelyn pulled up her contact list and called the hotel, got transferred to 6 different people before finally reaching someone who could help. "I need to know if Michael Cross is a registered guest," she said. "It's urgent, family emergency." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't release guest information. His daughter is trying to reach him. She's 8 years old and she's scared. Please." A pause. "Hold on." 2 minutes later. "We have no one registered under that name, but there are several guests who checked in without identification last night, survivors who lost their wallets in the crash. If you can describe him, I can ask the front desk staff to watch for him." Evelyn described Michael in detail. The woman promised to call if they spotted him. It wasn't much, but it was something. She paid for her coffee and headed back to the hotel. The lobby was still crowded with survivors and families, but the energy had changed. Relief had settled in. People were making plans to get home, booking flights, comparing stories. Evelyn scanned the crowd, looking for a worn jacket and tired eyes. Nothing. She tried the conference room where the airline was coordinating survivor support, asked if anyone had seen Michael Cross, got blank looks and apologies. Finally, she went back to her room and opened her laptop again. This time she searched differently. Not for Michael Cross the pilot, but for Michael Cross in connection with Skybridge Aviation. And there it was, buried in an industry newsletter from 11 years ago. Skybridge Aviation Systems terminates senior engineer Michael Cross after disagreement over safety protocols. Cross had raised concerns about the company's pressure guard hydraulic system, claiming it had fatal flaws that could lead to catastrophic failure. Company officials maintained the system met all regulatory requirements. Cross's employment was terminated for insubordination and unauthorized communications with regulatory agencies. The article was short, barely 2 paragraphs, but it told Evelyn everything she needed to know. Michael Cross hadn't just saved 300 people last night, he'd saved them from a failure he'd predicted 11 years ago. A failure in the system her company had built and defended, a failure they'd fired him for exposing. The pressure guard system was still in use, on hundreds of aircraft, including, she now realized with absolute horror, Flight 847. The plane had crashed because of the very system Michael had warned them about. The system Skybridge, her company, her responsibility, had insisted was safe. Evelyn's hands were shaking as she pulled up Skybridge's internal databases. She had access to everything as CEO: design documents, testing reports, incident logs. She'd never looked at the pressure guard files before. It was an older system, proven, reliable, according to all official reports. But as she dug deeper, she found something else. Buried in old QA reports, flagged and then dismissed. Pattern failures in extreme conditions, small hydraulic leaks that seemed statistically insignificant. Maintenance notes about pressure fluctuations that were written off as sensor errors. Every single thing Michael had warned about, and her company had ignored it all, had fired him for refusing to stay quiet, had protected their reputation and their contracts instead of fixing a flaw that had nearly killed 300 people. The room spun. Evelyn gripped the edge of the desk, fighting nausea that had nothing to do with her head injury. She'd built her entire career on being right, on making the tough calls, on trusting her judgment and the judgment of the people she'd hired. And she'd been so catastrophically wrong that it had almost killed her and everyone else on that plane. The man she'd dismissed, judged, and ignored had been the only one telling the truth, had sacrificed his career to try to stop this. And last night, he'd had to save everyone from a disaster he'd tried to prevent 11 years ago. A knock on her door. Evelyn ignored it. The knock came again, harder. "Evelyn, I know you're in there. Open up." Richard. She almost told him to go away again, but she needed someone to know what she'd found, needed someone to help her figure out what came next. She opened the door. Richard pushed past her, already talking. "Okay, I've been thinking about our strategy. We need to position you as a survivor, not just a CEO. Human interest, personal transformation. We can—" "Richard, stop." Evelyn's voice was hollow. "We have a much bigger problem." She showed him what she'd found, watched his face drain of color as he read the reports, the warnings, the documentation of a cover-up she'd never even known existed. "This is from before your time," Richard said finally. "You weren't CEO when they fired him. You didn't make this decision. I'm CEO now. It's my company, my responsibility." Evelyn closed her laptop. "And the man who tried to stop this is the same man who saved everyone last night. The man we destroyed professionally is the only reason 300 people are still alive. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find him, and then I'm going to make this right." "Evelyn, think about this. If you admit the company was wrong, if you acknowledge these flaws existed, people could have died because we ignored them. People almost did die. I won't make that mistake again. The board will never agree to this. The legal exposure alone, then the board can fire me." Evelyn stood up, suddenly certain. "But I'm not covering this up. Not for them, not for the company, not for anyone. We were wrong. I'm going to say so publicly, and I'm going to fix it." Richard stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You've lost your mind." "Maybe. Or maybe I just found it. She grabbed her jacket. I need to go. Where? To find Michael Cross. To apologize. To try to undo some of the damage we caused. She left Richard standing in her hotel room looking shell-shocked. Took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the late morning sunshine with absolutely no plan beyond finding the man who'd saved her life twice now, once from a falling plane and once from a life built on foundations too rotten to stand. Evelyn started with the obvious places. The hospital where they'd taken the injured passengers. 3 different locations, none of which had any record of treating Michael Cross. The emergency shelter the airline had set up for survivors without local accommodations. No sign of him there either. She called Jennifer Walters back, the caseworker, and got an address for Michael's apartment in Queens. She caught the next flight to New York. The apartment building was in a neighborhood that real estate agents would call transitional, code for working-class people holding on while developers circled like sharks. 4 stories of red brick, iron fire escapes, windows with air conditioning units that had seen better decades. Kids playing basketball in a concrete lot across the street. A bodega on the corner with hand-painted signs advertising lotto tickets and cheap cigarettes. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, trying to reconcile this place with the man who'd controlled a dying aircraft with surgeon-like precision. She'd expected something different, something that matched his competence, his bearing, his absolute command in crisis. But maybe that was the point. Maybe she needed to stop expecting anything and start seeing what was actually there. The building's front door was propped open with a brick. Inside, the hallway smelled like cooking spices and old carpet. Mailboxes lined one wall, most of them dented. She found the one labeled M Cross, 3B, and climbed the stairs. The 3rd floor was quieter. Late afternoon light filtered through a window at the end of the hall. Apartment 3B had a welcome mat with cartoon butterflies on it, the kind a child would pick out. Evelyn raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What was she going to say? Sorry we destroyed your career and nearly killed you with our faulty system, but thanks for saving us anyway. There were no words adequate for this conversation, no script she could follow. She knocked anyway. Footsteps inside. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 60s, Filipino, with silver streaking her black hair and eyes that assessed Evelyn in one quick sweep. She wore scrubs with cartoon characters on them. A nurse, Evelyn guessed, or maybe a medical assistant. Yes? The woman's voice was polite but guarded. I'm looking for Michael Cross. My name is Evelyn Hart. I was on the flight with him. It's important that I speak with him. The woman's expression didn't change. Michael's not here. Do you know where I can find him? His daughter is asking for him. A caseworker called me. I'm Rosa Gutierrez, Emma's caregiver. Rosa's stance shifted slightly, blocking the doorway more deliberately. Jennifer already called me. Michael knows Emma wants to talk to him. He'll call her when he's ready. I need to speak with him first, please. It's about the crash, about his former job with my company. Your company? Rosa's voice went flat. Skybridge Aviation. The company that fired him for doing the right thing. The company that made sure he'd never work as an engineer again. Yes. Evelyn met her gaze steadily. That company, which I now run, and which needs to answer for what it did to him. Rosa studied her for a long moment. Behind her, Evelyn could hear a television playing cartoons, a child's voice singing along with the theme song. Emma doesn't know yet, Rosa said quietly, about her father being on that plane, about what happened. She knows he went to her school event in Seattle, and she knows he was supposed to be home this morning. She's asking why he's late. How old is she? 8, and she's already lost her mother. She doesn't need reporters and cameras and people making her father into some kind of celebrity when all he wants is to be left alone to raise his daughter in peace. I understand. I'm not here as press. I'm here because I owe him an apology and an explanation, and because I need to make things right. You can't make it right, Rosa's voice hardened. You can't give him back 11 years of his life. You can't give him back his career or his reputation or the savings he burned through fighting your lawyers. You can't give Emma back the house they had to sell, or the college fund that's gone, or the security she should have had. Each word hit like a physical blow. Evelyn had known, abstractly, that firing Michael had consequences. But standing here, hearing them enumerated by someone who'd witnessed the damage firsthand, made it real in a way board reports never could. You're right, Evelyn said. I can't undo any of that, but I can acknowledge it publicly. I can make sure the system he warned us about gets fixed. I can clear his name and restore his reputation. And I can make sure Emma has that college fund again. It won't erase what happened, but it's a start. Why? Rosa demanded. Why now? Because he saved your life? Because you feel guilty? Yes, to all of it, but also because it's the right thing to do. Because my company was wrong, and I'm tired of building success on a foundation of lies. Rosa was quiet for a moment, then she sighed. He's at St. Catherine's, the church 4 blocks east. But if you upset him, if you make this harder for him than it already is, I will make you regret it. Michael is a good man who's been through enough. I understand. Thank you. Evelyn turned to leave, then paused. What happened to Emma's mother, if you don't mind my asking? Rosa's expression softened slightly. Cancer. 3 years ago. Emma was 5. Sarah, that was her name, she was a teacher. Special education. They were happy, you know? Really happy. Had a house in the suburbs, good jobs, plans for more kids. Then Michael got fired and blacklisted. Sarah had to keep working through her treatment because they needed the insurance. She fought for 2 years, but the stress, the financial pressure... Rosa shook her head. I'm not saying your company killed her, but you didn't help her survive either. Evelyn had no words for that. She just nodded and walked away, Rosa's voice following her down the hall. 4 blocks east, the old stone church. You can't miss it. The walk to St. Catherine's took her through streets that reminded Evelyn of what New York used to be before the hedge funds and tech companies remade it in their image. Corner stores run by families who'd been there 40 years. Apartment buildings where 3 generations lived within shouting distance. People who knew each other's names, who looked out for each other's kids. The kind of community Evelyn had left behind climbing toward the top. St. Catherine's was exactly what Rosa had described. Old stone, Gothic architecture, stained glass windows that had survived a century of city life. The heavy wooden doors were propped open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of candle wax and old wood. The sanctuary was mostly empty. A few people scattered in the pews, heads bowed in private prayer. Afternoon light filtered through the stained glass, painting everything in shades of blue and gold. Michael sat alone in the back row, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He'd changed clothes since the crash, jeans and a dark t-shirt, both clean but worn soft from many washings. The bandage on his temple stood out white against his dark hair. Evelyn slid into the pew behind him. He didn't turn, but his shoulders tensed slightly. He'd known she was there. Rosa called ahead, he said quietly. Told me you were coming. I can leave if you want. No, sit. He straightened up, but didn't turn around. I knew this conversation was coming eventually. Might as well get it over with. Evelyn moved to sit beside him instead of behind. Up close, he looked exhausted in a way that went beyond the crash, the kind of tired that lived in the bones. How did you find me? He asked. Your name was in old company records from when we fired you. She paused. I read the reports, all of them. The warnings you filed about the pressure guard system, the safety concerns you raised, the way we ignored everything you said and then destroyed your career when you wouldn't let it go. Michael was silent. Flight 847 crashed because of a pressure guard failure, Evelyn continued. The exact failure you predicted 11 years ago. You were right about everything, and we were wrong, and 300 people almost died because of it. But they didn't die. Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. That's what matters. You saved them from a disaster we caused, a disaster you tried to prevent. Evelyn had practiced this speech on the flight to New York, but now all her careful words felt inadequate. I'm sorry for all of it, for what my company did to you, for what it cost you and your family. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I need you to hear it anyway. Michael turned to look at her finally. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from exhaustion or emotion she couldn't tell. You weren't CEO when it happened. You didn't fire me. No, but I'm CEO now, which makes it my responsibility to fix it. How do you fix something that already happened? You can't give me back my job at Boeing. You can't give me back the years I spent fighting blacklist after blacklist, trying to find engineering work while my wife died and my daughter watched her father fail over and over. His voice remained quiet, but something raw had entered it. You can't give my daughter back her mother, who might have survived if we'd had the financial stability to get her the best treatment. You can't undo any of it. No, I can't. But I can make sure everyone knows you were right. I can clear your name publicly. I can fix the pressure guard system and make sure no other plane fails the way 847 did. And I can make sure Emma has the future she deserves. Michael shook his head. I don't want your money. I don't want your public apologies. I just want to raise my daughter in peace. What about justice? What about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else? Justice? Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. I learned a long time ago that there's no justice. There's just what you can control and what you can't. I can control being a good father to Emma. I can control showing up for my job. I'm a maintenance supervisor at an apartment complex, by the way, since you're probably wondering what happened to the engineer. I can control being there when she needs me. That's it. That's all I have left. You have more than that. You have the truth. And people need to hear it. Why? Michael stood up abruptly, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself and lowered it again, mindful of the church. Why do people need to hear it? So they can make me into some kind of hero? So reporters can camp outside my apartment and scare my daughter? So I can spend the next year doing interviews and testifying and reliving the worst parts of my life? So it doesn't happen again, Evelyn said simply. So the next engineer who sees a safety flaw doesn't stay quiet because they saw what happened to you. So my company, so the whole industry, knows there are consequences for putting profit over people. Michael sat back down, the fight draining out of him. I'm tired, Evelyn. I've been tired for 11 years. I just want to go home to my daughter. They sat in silence for a moment. Somewhere in the church, a door opened and closed. Footsteps echoed and faded. Tell me about Emma, Evelyn said, finally. Michael's expression softened immediately. She's 8. Smart as hell, loves butterflies, collects books about them, draws them constantly. She wants to be a scientist when she grows up, studies lepidopterist. He smiled slightly. She can't quite pronounce it yet, but she will. She gets that determination from her mother. Rosa mentioned her mother was a teacher. Special education. Sarah believed every kid deserved someone fighting for them, especially the ones everyone else had given up on. Michael's voice had gone gentle with memory. She would have loved what you're trying to do right now. The accountability, the making things right. That was her whole philosophy. You can't change the past, but you can choose better going forward. She sounds remarkable. She was. Emma's a lot like her. Same fire, same absolute certainty about right and wrong. It's beautiful and terrifying watching her grow up with Sarah's sense of justice. He paused. That's why I can't hide from this forever, even though I want to. Emma's going to ask questions. She's going to see the news coverage eventually, and I need to be able to tell her I did the right thing, whatever that turns out to be. Then help me fix this, Evelyn said. Not for the publicity or the recognition, for Emma. So she grows up knowing her father stood up for the truth and won, even if it took 11 years. Michael closed his eyes. What exactly are you proposing? Tomorrow I have a board meeting. I'm going to tell them everything. About the pressure guard failures, about you, about the cover-up. I'm going to recommend we ground every aircraft using that system until it's completely redesigned. And I'm going to publicly acknowledge what the company did to you. They'll fire you, probably, but I'll go out telling the truth. That has to count for something. Evelyn took a breath. I want you there. I want the board to hear directly from you about what you warned us about, what we ignored. I want them to look you in the face while they decide what matters more, their liability exposure or people's lives. You're asking me to relive the worst professional experience of my life in front of the people who made it happen. Yes, I am, and I have no right to ask that of you. Evelyn met his eyes. But I'm asking anyway, because you're the only one who can make them understand the real cost of what they did. Michael stared at the altar, at the light filtering through stained glass. If I do this, if I stand up in front of your board and tell them they were wrong, it opens up everything again. The media attention, the scrutiny, Emma's life becoming public property, Rosa's right that I've been through enough, that we've been through enough. I know, and if you say no, I'll respect that. I'll fight this battle alone if that's what you need. But it would mean more coming from you. The truth always means more from the person who lived it. A woman entered the sanctuary, moving slowly toward the front. She lit a candle, knelt, crossed herself. Her lips moved in silent prayer. Evelyn and Michael watched her, giving her the privacy her devotion deserved. After she left, Michael spoke again. When I was flying rescue, we had this saying, "You can't save people who won't grab the rope. Doesn't matter how good you are, how skilled, how determined. If someone won't reach for the help you're offering, there's nothing you can do but watch them drown." "I'm reaching," Evelyn said. "I'm reaching for the truth and for justice, and for doing the right thing even though it might destroy everything I've built. I just need you to help me hold on." Michael turned to look at her fully. In the colored light from the windows, his eyes were very dark. "Why? Why are you really doing this? It can't just be guilt. CEOs don't throw away their careers over guilt." Evelyn had asked herself the same question on the flight to New York, had examined her motivations from every angle, looking for the self-serving calculation that usually drove her decisions, but she kept coming back to the same answer. "Because I fell asleep on your shoulder," she said, "and you let me. You didn't wake me up or make it weird or use it as leverage. You just sat there and let a stranger rest because she needed it. And that kindness, that basic human decency, made me realize how far I drifted from being someone who would do the same thing." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Then the plane started falling, and you stood up. You didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate the risk to yourself. You just moved to help because people needed helping. And you saved all of us, including me. Saved us from a disaster my company caused because we valued money over safety. That still doesn't explain why you'd sacrifice your career. Because when I landed in that field and realized I was alive, my first thought wasn't about my company or my presentation or my reputation. It was about you, about understanding who you were and why someone with your competence and courage was sitting in coach reading about helping children grieve. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. And then I found out the truth. That we destroyed your life for being right. That my company's greed killed your wife, as surely as if we'd pushed her off a cliff. And I realized that everything I'd built was rotten at the foundation. So this is redemption for you. Maybe. Or maybe it's just the first honest thing I've done in years. I don't know anymore. I just know I can't go back to pretending everything's fine when 300 people almost died because the company I run values quarterly profits over human lives. Michael was quiet for a long time. Finally, he stood up. "I need to go see my daughter. She's been asking for me, and I've been putting it off because I didn't want her to see how shaken I still am. But she needs her dad more than I need to process my trauma. Of course, I'm sorry for taking up your time. I'll think about tomorrow, about the board meeting. I'll give you my answer tonight." He started to walk away, then turned back. "The apartment where I work as maintenance supervisor, it's the Riverside complex on West 47th. If you want my answer, meet me there at 7. I'll be doing rounds." He left before Evelyn could respond. She sat alone in the pew, watching light and shadow play across the walls, and wondered if she'd just convinced him or pushed him away. The rest of the afternoon blurred together. Evelyn found a hotel, tried to sleep, couldn't. She reviewed her presentation for the board meeting, but the words felt hollow now. All her careful projections and market analyses meant nothing when the fundamental premise was flawed. She opened her laptop and started writing something new, not a presentation, a confession. Every detail of what she'd learned about the pressure guard system, every warning Michael had filed, every decision the company had made to protect itself rather than fix the flaw. She wrote until her eyes burned and her fingers cramped, documenting everything so there would be a record even if the board refused to act. At 6:30, she caught a cab to the Riverside complex. The building was nicer than Michael's apartment, newer construction, better maintained, the kind of place young professionals rented before they could afford to buy. Evelyn found Michael in the basement, checking the boiler system. He wore work clothes now, canvas pants and a gray shirt with maintenance embroidered on the pocket. His hands were already dirty from whatever he'd been fixing. "Evelyn." He didn't look surprised to see her. "You're early." "I couldn't wait. She watched him test a valve, make a note on his clipboard. This is what you do now? Building maintenance? It's honest work, pays the bills, lets me be home for Emma when she needs me. He moved to the next system, checking gauges. And before you feel sorry for me, don't. I'm good at this job. People depend on me. Their heat works, their water's hot, their building is safe. That matters. I wasn't going to feel sorry for you. I was going to say it's a waste of your skills. My skills put me in a position where I had to choose between my career and my integrity, where I had to watch my wife die knowing we couldn't afford the best treatment, where I had to tell my daughter we were losing our house. Michael's voice remained even, factual. These skills, making sure a boiler works, fixing a leaky pipe, keeping people comfortable in their homes, nobody asked me to compromise my ethics for these. That's not a waste, that's a blessing. Evelyn had no response to that. She followed him through his rounds, watching him work with the same precise attention he'd shown landing the plane. He moved through the building like he knew every pipe, every wire, every system by heart. Residents who passed him in the halls called him by name, asked about Emma, thanked him for fixing their garbage disposal or their stuck window. He belonged here in a way Evelyn had never belonged anywhere, not in boardrooms or corner offices or first-class cabins. She'd spent 20 years accumulating power and prestige without ever finding community. When his rounds were finished, Michael led her to a small office near the boiler room. It was cramped and cluttered, desk covered in work orders, walls plastered with system diagrams and maintenance schedules. A child's drawing was tacked to the bulletin board, a butterfly, rendered in careful detail with colored pencils. Emma's signature in the corner, along with "For Daddy." Michael sat behind the desk and gestured for Evelyn to take the folding chair across from him. I talked to Emma this afternoon. Told her about the crash, about helping land the plane. She wanted to know if I was scared. What did you tell her? The truth. That I was terrified, but that being scared doesn't mean you stop doing what needs to be done. He picked up a pen, rolled it between his fingers. She asked if I was going to be on TV like a superhero. I told her no. That real heroes don't need cameras and attention. They just do the right thing quietly and go home to their families. That's a good lesson. It's the lesson I want her to learn. The lesson her mother would have taught her. Michael set down the pen. But I've been thinking about what you said, about Emma growing up knowing her father stood up for truth, and I realized that quietly going home might be the wrong lesson this time. Evelyn's heart kicked up. You'll do it? You'll come to the board meeting? On one condition, well, several conditions, actually. Michael pulled out a notepad and flipped to a page covered in his neat handwriting. I've spent the afternoon thinking about what I need if I'm going to relive the worst professional experience of my life in front of the people who caused it. Name them. First, I want complete immunity from any legal action your company might take. I'm going to tell the truth about what I observed, what I warned about, what happened. I won't let you use that against me later. Done. What else? Second, I want a public statement from Skybridge acknowledging that I was wrongfully terminated, that my concerns were valid, and that the company's subsequent actions to blacklist me from the industry were unjustified. I want my professional reputation restored. Absolutely. That's part of what I'm already planning to do. Third, I want a scholarship fund established in Sarah's name, not for Emma specifically, though she'll be eligible, but for children of aviation workers who die in the line of duty, pilots, engineers, mechanics, the people who keep planes in the air safely. Their kids deserve support. Evelyn nodded, her throat tight. How much? Start with $5 million. Increase it annually based on need. And I want oversight. I want to be involved in selecting recipients, making sure the money goes where it should. Done. What else? Last thing. After the board meeting, after the statement, after all of it, I want to be left alone. No interviews, no book deals, no speaking tours. I tell my truth once, publicly, and then I go back to my life. Emma deserves a father who's present, not one who's constantly reliving trauma for public consumption. I can't control the media, Evelyn said carefully. They'll want access to you. They'll camp outside your apartment, call you constantly. Then help me manage it. Hire security if needed, issue statements on my behalf, do whatever CEOs do to protect their privacy, and extend that protection to me and Emma. I will. You have my word. Michael studied her face for a long moment. Why do I believe you? I shouldn't. I should assume this is just another corporation making promises they won't keep. But something tells me you mean it. I do mean it, because you're right that I can't undo the past. But I can make sure the future is different. For Emma, for every other engineer who sees something wrong, for every passenger who trusts their lives to systems that need to be safe. Okay. Michael stood up and extended his hand. I'll be at your board meeting tomorrow. 10 a.m., right? 10 a.m. Evelyn shook his hand, feeling the calluses from his maintenance work. Thank you for trusting me, for being willing to do this. Don't thank me yet. You might regret bringing me in once the board realizes what you're really proposing. He walked her to the door. They're not going to just roll over and accept accountability. They're going to fight. They're going to threaten you, try to discredit both of us, do everything they can to protect the company. Let them try. I've got the truth on my side, and you. Truth doesn't always win, Evelyn. You know that as well as I do. Maybe not, but it's still worth fighting for. She paused at the threshold. Will you bring Emma? To the board meeting? Absolutely not. This isn't something she needs to see. I meant after, when this is over. I'd like to meet her if that's okay. Michael's expression softened. She'd like that. She's been asking about the other people on the plane, wanting to know everyone's okay. She has her mother's heart, always worrying about others. She sounds amazing. She is. She's the best thing I've ever done. He glanced at his watch. I need to get home. Rosa's been watching her all day, and Emma has school tomorrow. Of course. I'll see you at 10. Evelyn walked out of the Riverside complex into the evening air. The city hummed around her. Traffic, voices, life happening at its usual frantic pace. She felt disconnected from it all, like she'd stepped sideways into a different version of reality where the rules she'd lived by no longer applied. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Board wants full presentation on crash impact and recovery strategy. They're expecting you to spin this positively. Don't screw this up. She typed back, I'm not spinning anything. I'm telling the truth. Be prepared for fallout. His response came immediately. You're going to destroy everything we've built. Good, Evelyn wrote. It deserves to be destroyed. She silenced her phone and headed back to her hotel. She had a long night ahead of her, finalizing her statement, preparing for the battle that was coming. But for the first time in years, she felt clear about what she was doing and why. Tomorrow, she would walk into that boardroom and burn down everything she'd built. And she would do it with Michael Cross standing beside her, living proof that some things mattered more than quarterly earnings and stock prices. The truth mattered. Integrity mattered. Making sure that when planes fell from the sky, someone was there to catch them before they crashed. And if the board didn't like it, they could fire her. She'd survive. She'd figure out what came next. Maybe she'd discover what Michael had already learned, that honest work for honest pay, done for people who needed you, was worth more than all the corner offices in the world. She spent the night writing and rewriting her statement, trying to find words that captured the magnitude of what had happened without minimizing Michael's suffering or sensationalizing the crash. It was impossible. Every version felt inadequate. Finally, around 3 a.m., she gave up trying to make it perfect and settled for making it true. She wrote about the pressure guard system, about Michael's warnings, about the cover-up that had lasted 11 years. She wrote about Flight 847, about 300 people who almost died, about the man who saved them from a disaster he'd predicted. She wrote about her own complicity, about how she'd climbed to the top of a company without ever questioning whether its foundation was solid, about how she'd been so focused on quarterly results that she'd never stopped to ask what those results had cost. And she wrote about what came next. The grounding of all aircraft using pressure guard systems, the complete redesign, the public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, the scholarship fund in Sarah Cross's name, the restoration of Michael's reputation. The sun was rising when she finally finished. She showered, dressed in her best suit, armor for the battle ahead, and headed to Skybridge headquarters. The building was glass and steel, modern and imposing, designed to project power and success. Evelyn had loved it when they'd first moved in 5 years ago. Now it just looked like a monument to ego. She rode the elevator to the top floor. The boardroom was already set up. Long table, leather chairs, screens ready for her presentation. Richard was there early, pacing nervously. "Please tell me you're not going through with this," he said when he saw her. "I'm going through with it. Evelyn, the board is already concerned about the crash. If you come in here and tell them we've been covering up a safety flaw for 11 years, they will fire you on the spot. They might even try to claim you knew about it, that you're complicit. Then they'll be lying, and I'll deal with it. This is career suicide. Good thing I'm tired of this career." Evelyn set up her laptop and loaded her statement. "Is Michael here? The maintenance worker? Yes, he's in the conference room down the hall. Evelyn, it's not too late to change your mind. We can spin this differently. We can... No more spinning, Richard. No more PR. Just truth." She looked at him directly. "You can stay or you can go. But if you stay, I need you to support what I'm about to do. Can you do that?" Richard looked like he might be sick, but after a moment he nodded. "I think you're insane, but I'll support you. Someone should document this disaster for posterity." That's the spirit. The board members started arriving at 9:45. 11 of them, mostly men in expensive suits, all carrying the confidence that came from years of unchecked power. They greeted Evelyn with varying degrees of warmth, asked about her experience in the crash, expressed relief that she was okay. She smiled and played along, waiting. At 9:58, she went to get Michael. He was sitting alone in the conference room wearing a suit that looked borrowed, a bit too big in the shoulders, the tie slightly crooked. He looked uncomfortable and determined in equal measure. "Ready?" Evelyn asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." They walked into the boardroom together. The board members looked up, confusion crossing their faces at the sight of this stranger in an ill-fitting suit. The chairman, Gerald Winters, frowned. "Evelyn, we weren't expecting a guest. Who is this?" "This is Michael Cross," Evelyn said clearly. "Former senior engineer at Skybridge Aviation, the man who saved Flight 847, and the man we wrongfully terminated 11 years ago for refusing to stay quiet about a fatal flaw in our pressure guard system." The room went absolutely silent. Gerald's face had gone pale. Beside him, Marcus Chen, the board member who'd been with the company longest, looked like he might pass out. "Evelyn," Gerald said carefully, "I think we should discuss this privately before—" "No!" Evelyn's voice was firm. "We're done doing things privately. We're done protecting the company at the expense of the truth. Michael is going to tell you exactly what he told management 11 years ago, and then I'm going to tell you what we're going to do about it." She gestured for Michael to sit. He took the empty chair at the far end of the table, looking at each board member in turn. His jaw was set. His hands were steady. And when he began to speak, his voice carried the weight of 11 years of injustice finally being heard. Michael's voice was steady as he began, but Evelyn could see his hands gripping the edge of the table. "In 2014, I was the lead engineer on the pressure guard hydraulic integration team. My job was to ensure the system met not just regulatory standards, but real-world safety margins. During testing phase 3, I identified a critical flaw in the pressure relief valve sequence under extreme conditions." Gerald Winters shifted in his seat. "Mr. Cross, I'm not sure this is the appropriate—" "Let him finish," Evelyn said sharply. "You're going to hear all of it." Michael continued as if Gerald hadn't spoken. "The flaw was specific but catastrophic. Under conditions of rapid altitude change combined with extreme temperature variation, the primary and secondary relief valves could freeze in sequence, creating a hydraulic pressure cascade. The system would essentially tear itself apart from the inside. I documented this in 17 separate reports. I demonstrated it in controlled testing. I showed management exactly what would happen." Marcus Chen had his hand over his mouth. Two other board members were exchanging glances. One woman, Patricia Herrera, Evelyn remembered, was taking notes with shaking hands. "I was told the testing conditions were unrealistic," Michael said, "that the scenario I'd created would never occur in actual flight operations, that the cost of redesigning the system, approximately $40 million, wasn't justified by a theoretical risk. When I insisted on further testing, I was told to drop it. When I went to the FAA with my concerns, I was fired for insubordination and unauthorized disclosure of proprietary information." "That's not exactly how it happened," Marcus said, his voice tight. "You violated your NDA. You went outside proper channels. "I followed every proper channel," Michael interrupted, his voice hardening. I submitted reports through the engineering chain of command. I presented to safety committees. I requested meetings with executive leadership, all of which were ignored or dismissed. I only went to the FAA after 6 months of trying to work within your system, and you destroyed my career for it. The room was silent. Gerald looked like he was calculating something, running through legal exposure and liability in his head. But Patricia Herrera was staring at Michael with something that looked like horror dawning. Flight 847, she said quietly. The crash. It was the pressure guard system? Yes. Evelyn pulled up her presentation, displaying the NTSB's preliminary findings on the screen. Multiple system failures originating in the hydraulic pressure management system. Rapid altitude changes during severe weather, combined with extreme temperature variation at cruising altitude. The exact conditions Michael predicted. She clicked to the next slide, showing Michael's original report from 2014. Side by side with the NTSB findings, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Same failure points, same cascade sequence, same catastrophic results. 307 people were on that flight, Evelyn said. 23 of them were children. All of them nearly died because this board decided $40 million was more important than fixing a known flaw. Now wait just a minute. Gerald was standing now, his face flushed. You're making serious accusations without full context. The system passed all FAA requirements. Multiple independent engineers reviewed Mr. Cross's concerns and found them overstated. We made a reasonable business decision based on the best information available. You made a decision based on what was cheapest and most convenient, Michael said. His voice was still controlled, but barely. And when I wouldn't go along with it, you didn't just fire me. You made sure I couldn't work anywhere else. You contacted Boeing, Lockheed, Airbus, every major aerospace company, and told them I was unstable, that I couldn't be trusted, that hiring me would be a liability. You took away my ability to provide for my family. That's a serious allegation, Gerald said. Do you have proof? Michael pulled a folder from his briefcase. Evelyn hadn't known he was bringing documentation. He slid it across the table to Gerald. Emails between your VP of HR and hiring managers at 7 different companies. Obtained through discovery in the wrongful termination suit I couldn't afford to finish. You settled for peanuts knowing I was broke, knowing I couldn't keep fighting. But I kept the evidence. Gerald opened the folder. His face went from flush to pale as he read. He passed pages to Marcus, who went equally pale. The evidence was damning. Deliberate, coordinated sabotage of Michael's career, spelled out in corporate emails that assumed they'd never see daylight. My wife died 3 years ago, Michael said into the silence. Cancer. She was a teacher with good insurance through her school district, but the best treatment centers wouldn't take her plan. The experimental therapies that might have saved her cost more than we could afford after you blacklisted me. I watched her die, knowing that if I'd just kept my mouth shut about your faulty system, if I'd just gone along with the lie, she might still be alive. Patricia Herrera had tears on her face. Another board member, James Wu, had his head in his hands. But Gerald was still in damage control mode, his mind clearly working through how to contain this. Mr. Cross, I'm deeply sorry for your loss, Gerald said with what he probably thought was appropriate sympathy. But you can't blame your wife's death on business decisions made years earlier. And you certainly can't prove causation between— Stop! Evelyn's voice cut through the boardroom like a blade. Stop doing that. Stop calculating liability and spinning narrative. A man is telling you that our company destroyed his life, and all you can think about is protecting our legal exposure. I'm thinking about my fiduciary duty to shareholders, Gerald shot back, which is what I was elected to do, not to throw the company under the bus for decisions made by previous management. Previous management that you were part of, Evelyn reminded him. You've been on this board for 15 years, Gerald. You were here when Michael was fired. You were part of the decision to bury his warnings. Gerald's jaw tightened. What exactly are you proposing, Evelyn? That we admit liability for a crash that happened 3 days ago? That we expose ourselves to massive lawsuits? That we destroy shareholder value to assuage your conscience? I'm proposing we tell the truth. Evelyn clicked to her next slide, showing the plan she'd outlined at 3 a.m. We immediately ground all aircraft using pressure guard systems pending complete safety review. We publicly acknowledged that Michael Cross was wrongfully terminated and that his safety concerns were valid. We commit to a full redesign of the system at company expense. and we establish a $5 million scholarship fund in Sarah Cross's name for children of aviation workers. The room erupted. Multiple board members talking over each other, some angry, some shocked. Gerald was shouting something about legal suicide. Marcus was demanding to know if Evelyn had lost her mind. Only Patricia and James were quiet, staring at the presentation like they were seeing the company clearly for the first time. "This will bankrupt us," Gerald finally broke through the noise. "Do you understand that? The lawsuits alone will destroy this company. Every passenger on Flight 847 will sue. Every airline using our systems will demand compensation. Our stock will crater. We'll be finished." "Good," Evelyn said calmly. "If the only way this company survives is by continuing to lie about safety flaws that kill people, then it deserves to be finished." "You can't do this," Marcus said. "You don't have the authority. The board can overrule you. We can remove you as CEO right now." "You can. But Michael and I will still go public with everything. The difference is whether Skybridge controls the narrative or whether it's controlled for us, whether we look like a company taking responsibility or a company that got caught." Patricia spoke for the first time since learning about the crash. "How many aircraft are we talking about? How many planes are flying right now with this system?" Evelyn had known someone would ask. She'd done the research. 417 commercial aircraft worldwide, another 63 military, and about 200 in private or corporate use, roughly 680 aircraft total. "And you want to ground all of them?" Patricia's voice was faint. "The economic impact alone, airlines will sue us for every dollar they lose." "They should sue us," Evelyn said. "We sold them a faulty system and told them it was safe. We lied to regulators. We destroyed the career of the one engineer who tried to stop this. They should sue us, and they should win, and we should pay every penny we owe." Gerald was pacing now, his hands clenched. "I want to speak with Evelyn privately. The rest of you, take 15 minutes. "No," Evelyn said. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of Michael and the full board. No more private conversations. No more backroom deals." Gerald turned to face her, and his expression had shifted from anger to cold calculation. "You realize what you're doing, don't you? You're not just destroying this company. You're destroying your own reputation. Every CEO job in America will disappear the moment you admit liability. You'll never work in corporate leadership again. I know. Your stock options will be worthless. Your compensation package will evaporate. Everything you've worked for, I don't care." Evelyn met his eyes steadily. "I fell out of the sky 3 nights ago, Gerald. I thought I was going to die. And when the plane finally stopped sliding through that field, when I realized I was still alive, do you know what my first thought was? Not about the company, not about my career, about whether I'd lived a life worth living, and the answer was no." She clicked to her final slide. A photo of Flight 847's wreckage, illuminated by emergency lights. 307 people walked away from this crash because Michael Cross refused to give up, because he kept fighting to save us, even after we destroyed his life. "I'm done being the kind of person who would have destroyed him. I'm done building success on lies." James Wu cleared his throat. He was older than the others, nearly 70, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I think we need to consider Evelyn's proposal seriously, not because it's good for business, it clearly isn't, but because it's the right thing to do." "The right thing?" Gerald spun on him. "James, be realistic. If we admit liability, we're done. Every shareholder will sue. The SEC will investigate. We'll be criminally liable for covering up safety violations." "Then perhaps we deserve to be," James said quietly. "I've been on this board for 12 years. I was here when Mr. Cross raised his concerns. I remember voting to terminate his employment. I remember thinking we were protecting the company. But we weren't protecting the company. We were protecting ourselves from accountability." Patricia nodded slowly. "James is right. I voted the same way. We all did. We chose profit over safety, and people almost died because of it. Maybe it's time we faced consequences for that." "You're both insane," Marcus said. "You're talking about destroying billions in shareholder value, about putting thousands of employees out of work, about decimating an entire sector of the aviation industry." "We're talking about telling the truth," Patricia corrected. "About making sure this doesn't happen again. About giving Mr. Cross back what we took from him." Michael had been silent through this exchange, watching the board members argue over his life like it was a line item in a budget. Now he spoke, and his voice carried a weight that silenced everyone. "I don't want to destroy your company," he said. "I don't want thousands of people to lose their jobs. I just want acknowledgement that I was right and you were wrong, that I paid an enormous price for trying to keep people safe, and I want to make sure the next engineer who sees a problem doesn't face the same choice I did." "That's exactly what will happen if we admit liability," Gerald said. "Every whistleblower will come out of the woodwork claiming we silenced them. Every safety concern ever raised will become ammunition for lawsuits. We'll spend the next decade in court defending ourselves." "Maybe we should," Evelyn said. "Maybe that's what accountability looks like. Not a press release and a settlement, but actual consequences for actual harm." Gerald stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the rest of the board. "I'm calling for a vote. All in favor of removing Evelyn Hart as CEO effective immediately?" 5 hands went up. Gerald, Marcus, and 3 others who'd been silent through most of the discussion. But 6 hands stayed down. Patricia, James, and 4 others who were looking at Michael with something like shame on their faces. Gerald's expression darkened. "This isn't over, Evelyn. Even if you remain CEO, I'll fight this every step. I'll leak to the press that you're unstable, that the crash affected your judgment. I'll make sure everyone knows you're sacrificing the company for personal redemption." "Do whatever you need to do," Evelyn said, "but I'm moving forward with the plan. Tomorrow morning, I'm holding a press conference. I'm going to announce the grounding of all pressure guard systems. I'm going to publicly acknowledge what we did to Michael, and I'm going to take full responsibility for the company's actions, past and present." "You'll be sued personally," Gerald warned. "Shareholders will claim you violated your fiduciary duty. You'll lose everything." "I already lost everything that mattered when I stopped being someone who would do the right thing." Evelyn closed her laptop. "This meeting is over. Those of you who want to support what needs to happen, I'll see you tomorrow at the press conference. Those of you who want to fight it, talk to your lawyers. Either way, the truth is coming out." She stood up. Michael stood with her. Together they walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind the chaos of angry voices and shocked silence. In the hallway, Michael finally let out the breath he'd been holding. "That went about as well as I expected." "You were perfect," Evelyn said. "Calm, factual, damning, everything they needed to hear." "Half of them still don't want to hear it. That Gerald guy is going to make your life hell." "Let him try. I've survived worse." Evelyn paused at the elevator. "Thank you for doing that. I know how hard it was. It needed to be done. For Sarah, for Emma, for every passenger who gets on a plane trusting it's safe." Michael pressed the elevator button. "What happens now?" "Now I go prepare for the press conference. And you go home to your daughter. Tell her what you did today. Tell her that her father stood up to the people who hurt him and told them the truth." The elevator arrived. They stepped inside and Evelyn pressed the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, Michael spoke again. "You're going to lose everything, you know. Your job, your reputation, probably your savings. Was it worth it?" Evelyn thought about that moment in the plane when everything was falling. The terror, yes, but also the clarity. The sudden understanding that nothing she'd built mattered if it was built on lies. "Ask me again in a year," she said. "But right now, yes, it was worth it." The press conference the next morning was chaos from the start. Every major news outlet sent crews. Aviation reporters, business journalists, even the tabloids showed up sensing blood in the water. They packed the conference room at Skybridge headquarters, cameras rolling, questions shouted before Evelyn even reached the podium. Richard stood beside her, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Patricia Herrera and James Wu were there too, the only board members who'd agreed to stand with her. The rest had made their opposition clear. Gerald was already on CNBC claiming Evelyn had suffered psychological trauma from the crash and shouldn't be trusted with company decisions. Evelyn stepped to the microphone. The room gradually quieted, hundreds of eyes focused on her. She thought about Michael, at home with Emma, watching this on television. She thought about the passengers from Flight 847, scattered across the country, wondering if they'd really been as close to death as it had felt. She thought about the truth, and how it was about to blow up everything she'd spent 20 years building. Good morning. I'm Evelyn Hart, CEO of Skybridge Aviation Technologies. I'm here to make a statement about Flight 847 and about failures within this company that go back more than a decade. The room erupted with shouted questions. Evelyn held up her hand. I won't be taking questions until after my statement. Please hold your comments. She took a breath and began. On Saturday night, Flight 847 from Seattle to New York experienced multiple system failures that resulted in an emergency landing. 307 people were on that flight. 23 were children. All of them survived because a passenger named Michael Cross, a former pilot, helped land the aircraft safely. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. Evelyn continued, "What you don't know is that Michael Cross is also a former employee of Skybridge Aviation. In 2014, he was our lead engineer on the pressure guard hydraulic system, the same system that failed on Flight 847. Mr. Cross identified a critical flaw in that system during testing. He documented it extensively. He warned management that under specific conditions, the system could fail catastrophically. He was right." The room had gone completely silent. Every reporter was leaning forward, sensing the magnitude of what she was saying. Skybridge management dismissed his concerns. When he persisted, when he went to federal regulators with safety data, we terminated his employment. We then systematically prevented him from working anywhere else in the aerospace industry. We destroyed his career because he tried to keep people safe. Patricia Herrera was crying openly. James Wu had his hand on her shoulder. Richard looked like he might pass out. On Saturday night, the flaw Mr. Cross warned us about caused Flight 847 to fail. And the man we fired saved everyone on board from a disaster we could have prevented 11 years ago if we'd listened to him. If we'd put safety before profit. If we'd had the integrity to admit we were wrong. Evelyn pulled out a sheet of paper. Her hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. Effective immediately, Skybridge Aviation is grounding all aircraft using pressure guard hydraulic systems pending complete safety review and redesign. We are publicly acknowledging that Michael Cross was wrongfully terminated and that his safety concerns were valid and ignored. We are committing to full transparency with federal regulators about the system's flaws and our company's failure to address them. The room exploded, reporters shouting, cameras flashing. Evelyn spoke over the noise. Furthermore, Skybridge is establishing a $5 million scholarship fund in the name of Sarah Cross, Michael's late wife, for children of aviation workers who die in the line of duty. And I am personally apologizing to Michael Cross, to his daughter Emma, and to every passenger who has ever trusted their lives to a system we knew was flawed. She stepped back from the microphone. The questions came like bullets. Was she resigning? Was the company filing for bankruptcy? Were there criminal charges pending? What about the lawsuits? What about shareholder value? What about the FAA investigation? Richard stepped up to the microphone. Ms. Hart will not be taking questions at this time. We'll release a full written statement within the hour. Thank you. He practically dragged Evelyn off the stage as reporters surged forward, still shouting questions. Security held them back as Evelyn and her small group escaped to the elevator. In the executive suite, the phone was already ringing off the hook. Richard's assistant looked pale. CNN wants a live interview. The Wall Street Journal is demanding comment on stock impact. The FAA has called 3 times. And Mr. Winters wants to speak with you immediately. Tell them all I'll respond to official requests through proper channels, Evelyn said. And tell Gerald he can speak to me through my lawyer. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. You did the right thing. Emma is proud. So am I. Michael. Evelyn sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. Her email was flooded. Angry messages from board members, concerned messages from employees, interview requests from every media outlet in America. Skybridge stock had already dropped 18%, and trading had been halted pending further news. Patricia Herrera appeared in her doorway. The rest of the board is meeting right now, without us. They're going to try to remove you tonight. Let them. Evelyn felt strangely calm. I said what needed to be said. If they want to fire me for it, that's their choice. You're not worried? I'm terrified, but not about losing this job. I'm terrified about whether I did enough. Whether one press conference and a grounding order actually fixes anything, or if it's just performance. James Wu joined Patricia in the doorway. The FAA just announced they're launching a comprehensive investigation into pressure guard systems, and into Skybridge's safety protocols. They're requesting all documentation related to Michael Cross's employment and termination. Good. Give them everything. Full cooperation. Evelyn, they could find grounds for criminal charges against the company and potentially against individual executives. Then we'll face those consequences. That's what accountability means. Patricia and James exchanged glances. Then Patricia spoke. We're with you, whatever happens. We voted to keep you as CEO yesterday, and we're standing by that choice. You did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid, and we're going to help you see it through. Even if it costs you your board positions? Especially then, James said. I'm 72 years old. I've made enough money to last 3 lifetimes. What I haven't done enough of is the right thing. Better late than never. Evelyn's throat tightened. Thank you, both of you. They left her alone to face the tsunami of calls, emails, and media requests. By evening, the story had gone viral. Flight 847 was trending worldwide. News outlets were tracking down passengers for interviews. Someone had found Michael's address, and reporters were apparently camped outside his building, despite Evelyn's explicit request for his privacy. She called him immediately. Michael, I'm so sorry. I'm sending security to your building right now, and I'm having my lawyer draft a cease and desist for any outlet that harasses you or Emma. It's okay, Michael said, though she could hear Emma crying in the background. Rosa's handling it. She's better at dealing with reporters than I am, but Emma's scared. She doesn't understand why people want to talk to her daddy so badly. Tell her he's a hero. Tell her the whole world wants to thank him for saving people. I'm not a hero. I just did what needed to be done. There was a pause. Emma wants to know if the butterflies on the plane were okay. She's worried about them. Evelyn smiled despite everything. Tell her I'll personally check on every butterfly that was transported on Flight 847. I'll make sure they all arrived safely. She'll hold you to that. Good. She should. After they hung up, Evelyn spent an hour making that promise reality. She contacted the Cargo Manifest Department, tracked down 3 shipments of butterflies that had been on the flight, part of a conservation program. 2 shipments had survived fine. The third had suffered casualties during the emergency landing. She had the company make a substantial donation to the conservation program in Emma's name and got them to send her pictures of healthy butterflies for Emma. It was the smallest thing she could do. But it mattered to an 8-year-old who'd already lost too much, and that made it important. By midnight, Gerald and his faction had forced an emergency board vote. Evelyn was removed as CEO effective immediately. Patricia and James both resigned from the board in protest. The company's stock had dropped 42%. 3 major airlines had filed preliminary lawsuits. The FAA investigation was expanding by the hour. Everything was falling apart exactly as predicted. Evelyn cleaned out her office at 2 a.m., alone, except for security. 20 years of work packed into 4 boxes. Photos, awards, personal items that had meant something once. She left her nameplate on the desk. Let whoever came next deal with it. As she carried the last box to her car, Richard appeared in the parking garage. He looked exhausted, but not angry. You got what you wanted, he said. The truth is out. The company's stock is in free fall. You're fired. Michael Cross is vindicated. Congratulations. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to fix what was broken. You broke it more. You realize that, right? Thousands of employees are going to lose their jobs when this company collapses. All those aircraft grounded, that's costing airlines millions per day. The economic damage is catastrophic. And if I'd stayed quiet, more planes would have crashed. More people would have died. The economic damage would have been worse. Richard sighed. I know. I hate that you're right, but you are. I just wish there'd been a way to do this that didn't destroy everything. He handed her an envelope. Your severance. It's not much, the board made sure of that. But it's something. Evelyn took the envelope without opening it. What will you do now? Look for another job. Hope my association with you doesn't make me unemployable. He smiled slightly. Though, honestly, I'm not sure I want another PR job. Maybe I'll try something where I'm not paid to spin the truth. Let me know if you figure out what that is. I might join you. They shook hands and Richard walked away. Evelyn loaded her boxes into her car and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, staring at the Skybridge building. She She'd climbed so high, sacrificed so much, built an empire on foundations she'd never questioned, and now it was gone. All of it. Career, reputation, the identity she'd spent 2 decades constructing. She felt lighter than she had in years. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Emma wanted me to send you this." A photo appeared. A child's drawing of an airplane, colored in careful detail. People visible through the windows, all smiling, butterflies flying alongside the plane. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, "Thank you for making sure the butterflies were okay. Love, Emma." Evelyn stared at that drawing until her vision blurred. This was what mattered, not stock prices or quarterly earnings or corner offices. A child who still believed in kindness, a father who'd sacrificed everything for integrity. People who survived because someone refused to stay silent. She texted back, "Tell Emma the butterflies said thank you, too, and tell her I promise, no more planes will fall because grown-ups were too scared to tell the truth." She drove home through empty streets, the city sleeping around her. Tomorrow would bring more chaos, more lawsuits, more investigations, more reporters demanding statements. Her life as she'd known it was over. But somewhere in Queens, an 8-year-old girl was sleeping safely because her father had stood up to a room full of powerful people and told them they were wrong. And that same man had caught Evelyn when she was falling, not just from the sky, but from a life that had stopped making sense years ago. She'd lost everything, and somehow, impossibly, she'd never felt richer. The first week after Evelyn's firing was a blur of legal consultations, media requests she declined, and sleepless nights in her apartment wondering what came next. She'd expected regret, expected to wake up panicking about what she'd thrown away. Instead, she felt something close to peace. On Thursday morning, her doorbell rang at 7 a.m. She opened it to find Michael standing there with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like fresh bagels. "You look terrible," he said. "Thanks. Come in." He followed her into the apartment, taking in the half-packed boxes and the general chaos of someone whose life had just imploded. "Eating okay?" "Define okay." He set the coffee and bagels on her kitchen counter. "Rosa sent food. She's convinced you're starving yourself. She does this whenever someone's going through something, shows up with enough food to feed an army." Evelyn opened the bag to find not just bagels, but containers of homemade soup, rice, some kind of chicken dish that smelled incredible. Her eyes stung. "I don't even know her." "She knows you did right by me. That's enough for Rosa." Michael handed her a coffee. "Also, Emma made you something." He pulled out a folded piece of paper. Another drawing, this one showing 2 stick figures, one tall, one short, standing next to a butterfly garden. Labels and careful printing identified them as Ms. Evelyn and Emma. At the top, "When you are sad, remember butterflies." "She knows I got fired?" "She knows you did something brave that made some people angry. She wanted you to know she thinks you're cool." Michael smiled slightly. Her word, not mine. Evelyn set the drawing on her counter where she could see it. "How is she handling everything? The reporters? The attention?" "Better than I am, honestly. Rosa's been amazing. She's the one dealing with the press, telling them to leave us alone. Emma thinks the whole thing is exciting. She told her class her daddy was a hero who saved a plane, and now she's the most popular kid at school." He paused. "Which is good, I guess. Though I worry about her thinking fame is something to aspire to. It's not the fame she's excited about. It's having her father recognized for who he really is. That's different." They sat at her small kitchen table, eating bagels while morning light filtered through the windows. It felt strange and normal at the same time, having breakfast with someone who'd been a stranger 2 weeks ago. Someone who'd saved her life and then watched her burn down her career trying to make things right. "The FAA investigation is expanding," Michael said. "They called me yesterday. Want me to testify about everything, the original testing, the warnings I filed, what happened on Flight 847. They're talking about criminal charges against former executives. How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, tired. I'm tired of reliving it. But if testifying means other engineers won't face what I did, then it's worth it." He looked at her directly. "What about you? Any regrets yet?" "Not about telling the truth. Maybe about the timing, the approach. I could have been more strategic, found a way to fix things without destroying the company entirely." You think the company can be saved? I don't know, probably not in its current form. But maybe that's okay. Maybe some things need to burn down before they can be rebuilt properly. Michael was quiet for a moment. I got a call from Boeing yesterday, and from Lockheed Martin, and from 3 other aerospace companies I applied to 15 times over the past decade. Suddenly, everyone wants the engineer they wouldn't touch 11 years ago. Are you going to take any of them? No. He said it with absolute certainty. I'm done with that world. It took everything from me once. I won't give it a second chance. But you love engineering. I could see it when you talked about the system failures, about how things should have been designed. That passion doesn't just disappear. It didn't disappear. It just found a different outlet. Michael finished his coffee. I'm good at maintenance work. I solve problems, keep systems running, help people. That's engineering too, just on a smaller scale. And it lets me be home for Emma. That's worth more than any aerospace job. Evelyn understood that in a way she wouldn't have 2 weeks ago. The idea that small, honest work mattered more than prestigious positions. That being present for the people you loved was success of a different, more important kind. What about you? Michael asked. What's next for Evelyn Hart, former CEO? I have no idea. Every executive recruiter in America has blacklisted me. No company wants to hire the CEO who admitted her company's failures and destroyed billions in shareholder value. She smiled without humor. Turns out, integrity is a career killer. So do something else. Something that doesn't require corporate approval. Like what? I don't know, but you're smart, determined, and you just proved you're willing to sacrifice everything for what's right. That's a pretty good foundation. He stood up to leave. Rosa's having dinner on Sunday. She wants you to come. Fair warning. She'll feed you until you can't move, and she'll ask intrusive questions about your personal life. But she makes the best adobo you'll ever taste. I'd like that. Thank you. After Michael left, Evelyn sat with Emma's drawing and thought about foundations. What she wanted to build next. What mattered now that all the things she'd thought mattered had been stripped away. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Hart? This is Daniel Yoshida. I'm an attorney representing a group of Flight 847 passengers who are filing a class action lawsuit against Skybridge Aviation. Evelyn's stomach dropped. I see. We'd like to depose you as part of our discovery process. You made statements acknowledging the company's negligence, and we need your testimony about... I'll testify, Evelyn interrupted. Whatever you need. I'll tell you everything I know about the pressure guard system, about the cover-up, about all of it. I won't fight you on this. There was surprised silence on the other end. You understand this could increase your personal liability? Your public statements already make you vulnerable to... I understand. I'll testify anyway. Those passengers deserve compensation for what they went through. If my testimony helps them get it, then that's what I'll do. Daniel paused. I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've never had a former executive volunteer to help plaintiffs sue their own company. First time for everything. Evelyn felt something settle in her chest. Send me whatever paperwork you need. I'll cooperate fully. She spent the rest of the day reaching out to other passengers from Flight 847. She had their contact information from the airline's Survivor Coordination Program. One by one, she called them. Apologized, explained what the company had done and what she was trying to do now. Offered to help with their lawsuits, their trauma counseling, whatever they needed. Most were shocked to hear from her, some were angry, a few hung up immediately, but many listened, and some, like the woman who'd sat across the aisle from Michael, the one he'd helped with her oxygen mask, thanked her for telling the truth. I have nightmares every night, the woman said. Her name was Margaret Chen. Evelyn learned. 73 years old, flying to visit her grandchildren. I wake up feeling like I'm falling. My doctor says it's PTSD, but knowing what really happened, knowing someone's taking responsibility, it helps. Not much, but a little. I'm so sorry you went through that any of us did. That young man who helped me with my mask, Michael something, I've been trying to find him to say thank you. Do you know how I could reach him? Evelyn promised to pass along the message. She added Margaret to a growing list of passengers who wanted to thank Michael personally. He wouldn't welcome the attention, she knew, But maybe he needed to hear from the people he'd saved, needed to see that his sacrifice, both 11 years ago and last week, had mattered. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Passengers reaching out to each other, forming connections born from shared trauma. Someone created a Flight 847 survivors group online, and within 48 hours, it had over 200 members. They shared stories, resources for therapy, photos from that night. They supported each other through panic attacks and nightmares and the simple struggle of getting back on an airplane. Evelyn joined the group, posted her apology there too, along with an explanation of what had happened and what she was doing to fix it. The response was mixed, some anger, some forgiveness, mostly just people trying to process what they'd survived. One post stopped her cold. A young mother named Jessica Torres had written, "I keep thinking about how close my daughter came to growing up without a mother. She's 3. She wouldn't even remember me. My husband and I are fighting because he doesn't want me to fly anymore, but my job requires travel. I don't know how to move forward." Evelyn spent an hour crafting a response about trauma and healing and the importance of professional help. But what Jessica really needed wasn't advice from a disgraced CEO. She needed practical support, therapy, maybe job counseling, resources for families dealing with PTSD. An idea began forming, a small seed of possibility. By Sunday evening, Evelyn showed up at Rosa's apartment with flowers and a bottle of wine she'd agonized over choosing. Rosa opened the door wearing an apron covered in flour, her face lighting up with welcome. "Evelyn, come in, come in." Michael's in the kitchen pretending to help. Emma's showing off her butterfly collection to anyone who'll look at it. The apartment was warm and loud and full of people. Rosa's extended family, apparently, cousins and nephews, and a grandmother who spoke only Tagalog but smiled at Evelyn like she was already part of the clan. Michael was indeed in the kitchen, chopping vegetables while arguing good-naturedly with someone about the proper way to cook rice. And Emma, 8 years old with dark hair and 2 braids, wearing a t-shirt with a monarch butterfly on it, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. "Are you Ms. Evelyn?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Daddy says you're the one who made sure the butterflies were okay. Do you want to see my collection? I have 43 books about butterflies, and I've seen 17 different species, and I'm going to be a lepidopterist when I grow up." "Emma, breathe," Michael said from the kitchen, but he was smiling. "Let Ms. Hart get through the door first. It's just Evelyn, and I would love to see your collection." Emma grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a bookshelf crammed with field guides, picture books, and scientific texts that seemed far too advanced for an 8-year-old. But as Emma started explaining the life cycle of the monarch butterfly with perfect accuracy, Evelyn realized this child was exactly like her father, absolutely certain about what she loved, undeterred by whether it fit other people's expectations. "The milkweed is the most important part," Emma explained seriously. "Without it, the caterpillars can't eat, and the whole species would die. That's why conservation matters. You have to protect the things that protect other things, you know?" "That's very wise," Evelyn said, and meant it. Dinner was chaos in the best possible way. Too much food, too many conversations happening at once, Rosa constantly refilling plates and refusing to let anyone leave the table until they'd eaten more than humanly possible. Evelyn sat between Michael and Emma, listening to stories about Rosa's nursing work, about Emma's school play, about the cousin who was getting married next month. Normal life, family life, the kind Evelyn had sacrificed for conference calls and board meetings, and the relentless climb toward more. After dinner, after Emma had been put to bed despite her protests that she wasn't tired, after the extended family had gone home, Evelyn helped Rosa and Michael clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, washing dishes and putting away leftovers. "You look better," Rosa observed, "less like someone about to shatter." "I feel better, more settled maybe, even though everything's still a mess." "What will you do now?" Rosa asked. "For work, I mean." Evelyn dried a plate carefully before answering. "I've been thinking about that, about what actually matters. And I keep coming back to the people on that flight, what they're dealing with now, what they need to heal." She told them about her idea, a nonprofit organization focused on supporting survivors of aviation disasters. Not just immediate crisis response, but long-term help, therapy, legal support, job counseling for people whose careers were disrupted, family services. Everything she wished had existed for Michael and Sarah 11 years ago. I have some savings left, she said, enough to get it started, and I've been researching similar organizations for survivors of other traumas. There's a blueprint for this kind of work. I just need to adapt it. Michael was leaning against the counter, his expression thoughtful. You want to help people deal with the aftermath of crashes? I want to help them rebuild their lives after trauma. Aviation disasters specifically, because that's what I know now. But the principle is the same. When something terrible happens, people need more than thoughts and prayers. They need practical support and someone who understands what they're going through. That's good, Rosa said quietly. That's really good. Sarah would have loved that idea, helping people nobody else thinks to help. The problem is credibility, Evelyn admitted. Who's going to trust a nonprofit run by the CEO who admitted her company caused a crash? I'm the worst possible face for this kind of organization. Then don't be the face, Michael said. Be the foundation. Do the behind-the-scenes work. Fundraising, administration, building the programs. Let other people be the public advocates. Like who? Like Flight 847 survivors who want to help other survivors. Like the families of people who've been through this. Like, he paused, considering. Like me, maybe, if you want. Evelyn stared at him. You do that? Work with me on this? Part-time. I'm not giving up my maintenance job. I meant what I said about being there for Emma. But a few hours a week consulting on safety issues, maybe talking to families dealing with aviation trauma, I could do that, if it helps. It would help enormously. Evelyn felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry more in the past 2 weeks than in the previous 2 years. Thank you for trusting me with this, for believing I can do something good. You already did something good, Rosa said firmly. You told the truth when lying would have been easier. You sacrificed your career for integrity. That's the foundation everything else builds on. They finished cleaning in thoughtful silence. When Evelyn left an hour later, Emma's latest drawing tucked carefully in her bag, she felt something she hadn't felt since before the crash. Purpose, direction, a sense that what came next might actually matter. The following week was a whirlwind of activity. Evelyn filed paperwork to establish the nonprofit. She called it the Sarah Cross Foundation for Aviation Safety and Survivor Support, with Michael's permission. She reached out to trauma counselors, legal aid organizations, and other survivor advocacy groups. She connected with Flight 847 passengers who wanted to help, who understood viscerally what future survivors would need. The FAA investigation concluded that Skybridge had knowingly covered up safety flaws and that multiple executives should face criminal charges. Gerald Winters and Marcus Chen were arrested. 2 other board members resigned. The company filed for bankruptcy protection as lawsuits multiplied. Evelyn testified at every hearing, deposition, and trial she was asked to participate in. She held nothing back. Every detail of what she'd learned, every document she'd found, every conversation she'd had with Michael about what the company had done. The plaintiff's attorneys loved her. Defense attorneys looked at her like she was insane. Other executives started avoiding her at legal proceedings, like integrity might be contagious. Skybridge's bankruptcy proceeded messily. The company was essentially dismantled, its assets sold to pay settlements. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs. The aviation industry was in turmoil as the full extent of the pressure guard failures became public. But something else happened too. Other engineers started coming forward with safety concerns they'd been afraid to raise. Other companies started reviewing their whistleblower protections. The FAA announced sweeping changes to how safety reports were handled and investigated. Michael's vindication was complete. Every aerospace company that had blacklisted him issued public apologies. Boeing offered him not just a job, but a senior position leading safety oversight. He turned them all down and kept showing up to his maintenance job, kept being home when Emma got off the school bus, kept living the life he'd built from the ruins of the one they'd destroyed. Don't you want it back? Evelyn asked him one afternoon as they worked together on foundation planning. They'd rented a small office space, just 2 rooms and a shared bathroom, but it was theirs. The career, the prestige, the recognition you deserve? I have what I deserve, Michael said simply. A daughter who knows her father has integrity, a job that lets me sleep at night, Friends who value honesty over status. That's enough. Most people would want more. Most people didn't watch their wife die while being unable to afford the treatment that might have saved her. Most people didn't spend 11 years learning that the only thing that really matters is being able to look at yourself in the mirror without flinching. He looked at her directly. You're still learning that lesson, but you're getting there. He was right. Evelyn was learning to measure success differently. Not by title or salary or corner office, but by whether she'd done something that mattered, whether she'd helped someone who needed it, whether she could sleep at night knowing she'd told the truth, even when it cost her everything. The Sarah Cross Foundation launched officially 6 months after the crash. The ceremony was small, just Flight 847 survivors, Emma and Rosa, a handful of trauma counselors and legal advocates who'd agreed to partner with them. No press, no politicians, no corporate sponsors, just people who understood what it meant to survive something terrible and wanted to help others do the same. Emma cut the ribbon with oversized scissors, her face serious with the importance of the moment. She was wearing a butterfly necklace Evelyn had given her, delicate silver wings that caught the light. My mommy would be so happy about this, Emma said to the small crowd. She always said the most important thing is helping people who need help. That's what this place does, and that's what makes it special. Michael's eyes were wet. Rosa was openly crying. Evelyn felt her throat close up with emotion. They'd done it. Built something good from something terrible. Created support that would help people rebuild their lives after trauma. It wouldn't bring back Sarah. Wouldn't erase the 11 years Michael had suffered. Wouldn't undo the crash or the fear or the damage. But it was something. It was honest work that mattered. That night, Evelyn stood in the foundation's small office and looked at the walls they had decorated with photos. Flight 847 survivors smiling at their first support group meeting. Emma's butterfly drawings scattered throughout. Michael's original safety reports, framed now as a reminder of why this work existed. A quote from Sarah Cross, something Michael had shared. Every person deserves someone fighting for them, especially when the fight seems impossible. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret Chen, the elderly woman from the flight. Just got on an airplane for the first time since the crash. Terrified but doing it. Your foundation's counselor helped me prepare. Thank you for everything. Another text. This one from Jessica Torres, the young mother. 3 months of therapy through your program, and I'm finally sleeping through the night. My daughter won't grow up with a mother who's afraid of the world. Thank you. And a third from someone she didn't know. I'm a mechanical engineer at an aircraft manufacturer. I found a safety flaw in a system my company is about to deploy. I was going to stay quiet, didn't want to end up like Michael Cross. But then I read about the foundation and what you both did, and I realized staying quiet makes me complicit. I'm filing a report tomorrow. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. Evelyn read that last message 3 times, her vision blurring. This was it. This was the thing that mattered more than any corner office or CEO title. Some engineer she'd never meet was going to speak up about a safety flaw because Michael had spoken up and paid the price, and she'd amplified his truth. People wouldn't die because that engineer stayed silent. Families wouldn't be destroyed. Children wouldn't lose parents. All because a tired single father had refused to compromise his integrity 11 years ago. Because he'd stood up in a falling plane and refused to let everyone die. Because he'd walked into a boardroom full of people who'd destroyed him and told them the truth anyway. And because Evelyn had finally woken up, literally on his shoulder, and realized that the life she'd built was hollow at its core. A year after the crash, Flight 847 survivors held a memorial service at the crash site. The farmer who owned the field had agreed to let them place a monument, a simple stone marker that read, Flight 847, all souls survived. May we remember that truth matters more than comfort. Evelyn stood with Michael and Emma, surrounded by passengers she'd come to know as friends. The co-pilot was there, recovered from his injuries and flying again. Flight attendants who still had nightmares but showed up to help other trauma survivors. People who'd been strangers that terrible night, but were bonded now by shared survival. Margaret Chen approached with her grandchildren. I wanted them to meet the people who saved their grandmother's life, to understand that heroes aren't just in movies. The children stared at Michael with appropriate awe. He crouched down to their level, smiling. You know what real heroism is? It's your grandmother getting back on an airplane even though she was scared. It's choosing to keep living instead of letting fear win. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. But you saved the plane, the oldest child said. I helped land it. But your grandmother saved herself by being brave enough to fly again. That's harder than anything I did. Emma tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. Can I show them the butterflies? There's a whole field of them over there. Go ahead, sweetheart. Emma led the children away toward a meadow where monarchs were feeding on wildflowers. Their laughter drifted back across the field. She's amazing, Margaret said. You both raised a beautiful soul. That was all Sarah, Michael said quietly. I'm just trying not to mess up what she started. You're doing fine, Margaret assured him. Then she turned to Evelyn. And you. My son is an engineer. He was facing a choice about whether to report a problem at his company. He was scared of retaliation. I told him about what you did, how you lost everything by telling the truth but gained something more important. He filed his report. His company is fixing the problem. That's because of you. After the ceremony, after most people had left, Evelyn and Michael stood together looking at the monument. Do you regret it? Michael asked. Everything you gave up? Not even a little bit. You were right that day in the church. Some things need to burn down before they can be rebuilt. I needed to burn down my life to build one that actually mattered. And the foundation, is it what you hoped? It's better. We helped 64 families last month, provided therapy, legal support, financial counseling, connected survivors with each other. That's 64 families whose lives are better because we exist. She paused. One of them sent me a letter, said our counselor helped her daughter talk about what happened on their flight. The daughter had stopped speaking after the crash, traumatic mutism. 3 months of therapy and she's talking again. Michael, we gave a child her voice back. That's good, he said simply. That's really good. Emma ran back toward them, breathless and excited. The monarchs are migrating. There must be hundreds of them. Come see. They followed her to the meadow where butterflies filled the air like living confetti, their orange and black wings catching the afternoon sun. Emma stood in the middle of them, arms outstretched, face turned up toward the sky. This is what Mommy wanted, she said, for people to protect each other. Like the butterflies protect the flowers by spreading pollen, and the flowers protect the butterflies by giving them food. Everything connected, everything helping. Michael looked at his daughter with such profound love that Evelyn had to look away. This was what she'd almost destroyed. This family, this child, this man who'd sacrificed everything for integrity and had somehow emerged stronger for it. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For letting me sleep on your shoulder, for saving the plane, for giving me a chance to make things right, for trusting me enough to build something good together, for... Her voice broke. For showing me what actually matters. Michael was quiet for a moment, watching Emma chase butterflies. You know what I've learned? Falling doesn't kill you. It's the landing that matters, and how you get back up afterward. That's very wise. I've had a lot of time to think about it. He smiled slightly. The plane fell, but we landed. Everyone survived, and now we're helping other people land safely when their worlds fall apart. That's not a bad outcome from a catastrophe. It's a beautiful outcome. They stood together in the meadow, watching Emma and the butterflies, the sun warm on their faces. A year ago, Evelyn had been a CEO who dismissed maintenance workers and measured life in quarterly reports. A year ago, Michael had been a maintenance supervisor hiding from the world that had destroyed him. Now they were something else, something better. People who'd survived falling and learned that the landing mattered more than the fall, that truth mattered more than comfort. That integrity was worth more than any corner office. The Sarah Cross Foundation thrived. In 2 years, they helped over 300 families. Other organizations started copying their model. Airlines began partnering with them to provide immediate support for crash survivors. Engineers facing retaliation started reaching out for advice and advocacy. Michael kept his maintenance job but gradually took on more consulting work for the foundation. He testified before Congress about safety protocols. He spoke at engineering conferences about the importance of whistleblower protections. He became the face of integrity in an industry that had forgotten what the word meant. Emma grew up knowing her mother's name meant something important. That her father was someone who'd stood up when standing up cost everything. That family friend Evelyn was proof that it's never too late to choose the right thing over the easy thing. And Evelyn built a life that finally felt like it fit. Not because it was prestigious or powerful, but because every morning she woke up knowing she was doing work that mattered. Helping people who needed help, fighting for truth in a world that preferred comfortable lies. Sometimes she thought about her old life, the boardrooms and first-class cabins and corner office, the power and prestige, the identity she'd built over 20 years. She didn't miss any of it, because she'd learned something that night when the plane was falling, when Michael's calm voice cut through the terror and promised them all that he wouldn't let them crash. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need titles or recognition or credit. Real strength is the single father reading about grief at 30,000 feet because his daughter needs him to understand loss. It's the maintenance worker who keeps showing up even after the world has broken him. It's the engineer who speaks truth to power, knowing it will cost him everything. Real strength is choosing integrity over comfort, is burning down a corrupt empire rather than let one more plane fall, is building something good from the ashes of something terrible. Real strength doesn't demand attention or accolades. It just shows up when everything's falling and makes sure everyone lands safely. 5 years after the crash, on a clear autumn day much like the one when Flight 847 went down, Evelyn stood in a packed auditorium and watched Michael receive the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. The president herself presented it, praising his courage in exposing safety flaws and his tireless work to support other whistleblowers. Emma sat in the front row, 13 now, and studying environmental science, her butterfly necklace still around her neck. Rosa was beside her, crying happy tears, and Evelyn stood in the back, watching the man who'd saved her life twice receive recognition he'd never wanted but absolutely deserved. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded Michael. He handled them with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, deflecting praise and redirecting attention to the foundation's work, to other engineers who'd spoken up, to the importance of systemic change. One reporter asked the inevitable question, "Mr. Cross, do you regret anything about how your story unfolded? The career you lost? The years of struggle?" Michael was quiet for a moment. Then he looked toward Emma, toward Rosa, toward Evelyn in the back of the room. "I regret that my wife didn't live to see this," he said finally. "I regret that the system was so broken it took a plane crash to fix it. I regret every day that it took 11 years for the truth to matter. But do I regret speaking up? Regret choosing integrity over comfort? Regret the life I built after everything fell apart?" He shook his head. Not for a second. That night, they celebrated at Rosa's apartment like always. Too much food, too much noise, Emma showing off her science project about butterfly migration patterns, while Rosa's extended family asked intrusive questions, and Michael laughed at stories Evelyn told about her former life as a CEO. "I can't believe you used to intimidate boardrooms," Rosa teased. "You're such a softie now." "That's what happens when you realize that being feared isn't the same as being respected," Evelyn said, "and that power without integrity is just organized cruelty." "Look at you, getting all philosophical," Michael said, but he was smiling. Emma finished her presentation and plopped down next to Evelyn. "Are you happy?" she asked with the directness only teenagers could manage. Like, really happy? Not just pretend happy? Evelyn thought about that question. About her tiny apartment compared to her former penthouse. About her secondhand car compared to the company Mercedes. About nonprofit work compared to executive compensation. About the life she'd built from the ruins of the life she'd destroyed. "Yeah," she said. "I really am." "Good. Because you're one of my favorite people, and I want you to be happy." Emma said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Then she bounded off to show her project to Rosa's cousin. Michael caught Evelyn's eye across the room, raised his drink slightly in a toast only she would see, to survival, to integrity, to the long journey from falling to landing to standing back up and building something that mattered. Evelyn raised her own drink in return. They'd both lost everything that night when Flight 847 started falling. Career, reputation, identity, comfort. Everything they'd built their lives around. And they'd both gained something more valuable than anything they'd lost. Purpose. Community. The bone-deep certainty that came from choosing truth over convenience. The peace that came from being able to look at yourself in the mirror without flinching. Real strength, Evelyn had learned, didn't need to be loud or dramatic or celebrated. It was quiet and persistent and often invisible to everyone except the people it saved. It was Michael letting an exhausted stranger sleep on his shoulder without making it weird. It was him standing up when a plane was falling and refusing to let everyone die. It was him walking into a boardroom of people who'd destroyed him and telling them the truth anyway. It was Evelyn choosing to amplify that truth even though it cost her everything. It was her building a foundation to help others survive their own falling. It was showing up every day to do work that mattered even when nobody was watching or celebrating or noticing. Real strength didn't announce itself or demand recognition. It just showed up when everything was falling and made sure everyone landed safely. And when the landing was over, when survival was certain and the worst had passed, real strength got up quietly and started building something good from the wreckage. Something honest. Something that helped other people survive their own falling. That was the lesson Evelyn had learned at 30,000 feet while her head rested on a stranger's shoulder. That was the truth Michael had been living for 11 years before she'd been ready to understand it. And that was the foundation, literally and figuratively, they'd built together in the years since that terrible night when everything fell apart and everyone survived because someone refused to give up. The butterflies, Emma would tell you, understood this instinctively. They migrated thousands of miles, each generation taking up where the last left off, protecting each other through connected effort and shared purpose. No butterfly made the whole journey alone. They all did their part, and that collective strength carried them forward. People, Evelyn now understood, were supposed to work the same way, not competing for who could fly highest or fastest, but protecting each other, helping each other land safely when the world tilted sideways and everything started falling. That was what the Sarah Cross Foundation did. What Michael and Emma and Rosa and all the Flight 847 survivors did every day. What Evelyn had finally learned to do when she stopped measuring success by altitude and started measuring it by how many people she'd helped land safely. The plane had fallen, but everyone survived. And now, 5 years later, they were all flying again, not toward power or prestige or the empty promises of corner offices, but toward purpose and community and the quiet strength that comes from choosing integrity even when it costs everything. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything that mattered.